like the first bird. Pray for the evening, pray for the morning, pray for the dawning of the first word. Hello everyone, how are we doing? Today is Washington Treaty Issues, and hopefully you're hearing me all fine and everything is good. He says, hopefully. Hopefully everything is good. Hello Peter Dawson, hello Jack Ray, hello 96831, hello Sage, and hi Calvin Gasberg, hello DH89, hello Dan Freeman, hello DG40. Hello everyone, how are we all doing? So, I'm Dr. Alex Clarke. I have Iron Brew. I have 62 slides, which are all timed to change every roughly 4 minutes. So that tells you how long this could actually theoretically be. I've started this at 6:30. Not planning on walking the dogs this evening because it's so hot, actually the dogs can't go out because the pavements are too hot. They will burn their paws because the UK, the tarmac is that well done. Thank you. Sound is terrible. Some sort of horrific singing, or possibly someone is torturing a load of cats. Thank you. Hello, sound is fine. Glad to hear that. Hi, Steve Richards. Hello, Felix B. Hello, everyone. So the sound is either good or my singing is terrible. Hello, Dirt Squad. So this video is the live for all the treaties. I do expect to have to discuss this again at future times, but there's basically, I said for the Equitable Treaty series, because I've done so many videos, I would do a live which is combined. A combined treaty analysis live, basically. And that's what this is. This is about talking about equitable treaties and how you make treaties work and how they can be equitable. Which is... That's what I want. My little portable scales. Which is always fun. It's always fun to think about. It's always fun to talk about because it's the way you can learn some lessons from treaties. Because if you start off with what would an equitable treaty look like, and you then examine the treaty, you can see when it's become inequitable, where other factors have entered the process. For one of the things is it's when you can start to pop out, hang on, where are the short-term domestic politics affecting what is long-term good international politics and good international strategy and relations? Because these things do impact. Domestic is always going to have an impact on your foreign policy. So if you start off with, well, this is what a pure foreign policy, rational, everything being done to minimize the risk of conflict looks like, versus this is what's going to look like it minimizes the risk of conflict to people who don't really understand conflict. I don't. Hi, Mr. Richards. Hello, 960. The British get 4th G3s, aka Duncan-class aircraft carriers. Is it fair to say that, if anything, the illustrious means that yet again the Italians are up Ship's Creek without a paddle? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, this is the scenario. Again, any scenario which has the British with more carriers at Taranto, we see what happens with them at Taranto. And the thing is, again, more carriers beget more carriers. As a phrase I keep coming on is early victories, early results can have a big long-term consequence for a war, because what you start a war with is what you have to fight the war. Any losses will have a cumulative impact. So you have Glorious and Courageous around, even just one of them around at the time of Taranto. They are probably, because where's the most important part for the conflict going on? They're probably in the Mediterranean with Eagle. And then when Illustrious goes out, well, are you going to keep Eagle pressing on because you've got you've now got 3 carriers, so if 2 are operational, you're fine. You can afford to maintain Eagle properly. And that's the thing. I often think with Eagle, the scenario, what happens with her is they're trying to push her as hard as they can, and they're crossing fingers because they desperately need at least 2 carriers available in case one gets damaged. Whereas if you have free, well, yeah, Eagle's got to be offline for a couple of days while we fix her oil supply, her fuel system. They'd fix it. In which case, you could end up with not 2 carriers, but 3 carriers taking part in Toronto. And with the combined air group of those 3 carriers, that's a huge strike increase. Does that necessarily relate to more kills? You can't predict that accurately, but the odds are in their favour. Because I can't see it getting any better for the Italians because there's more aircraft involved. So it's a case of the long-term impact could be massive because again, we see the impact of basically their ships being out of commission for a few months. You get more hits, that's going to be more damage. More damage could well take those ships out for longer, or take them out for good. In which case, that's going to affect the needs of the Mediterranean fleet. That's going to affect the operations in Crete. That's going to affect the operations around some of the various convoy battles, which I'll be talking Italian military archives at some point soon. I'm hoping to do some discussions with him about the various convoy battles. And the thing is, once you have them going in, and once you have those things going on, you have an impact. You have something. You don't know what it is, but it's going to have an impact, and it will have consequences again for the Far East. It'll have consequences for the Atlantic, because if you've taken out all the Italians' bit of fast battleships, then the Queen Elizabeth class are freed up, and you can do the Mediterranean with the R's. And if you can do the Mediterranean with the R's, then the Queen Elizabeths could be sitting back with the home fleet to support operations against Bismarck and Tirpitz and those, or they could be deployed to the Far East to back up the forces out there instead of the R's being deployed there, because you don't need the fast battleships. These are all consequences going to happen from having more aircraft carriers and having more availability of aircraft carriers at the beginning of World War II. Krista, volume levels have been better since you got back from America's Hat. Canada was lovely. And yes, because, well, as said, just before I went, I found out what was causing the problems. It was MS Teams. Jordan Newman, Iron Brew on order, 12-pack for $31.93 US. $5.50 US cheaper than 2 6-packs. That's good. That actually sounds like quite a decent price, actually, think about it. Michael Couch, at the risk of causing apoplexy, something I saw while shopping. Sugar-free Iron Brew. Good idea or damn or heresy? For people who are actually have a reason to have sugar-free stuff, it's something good for them, if I'm being serious. But to me, it'd be a case of no. It's like whenever I go on a diet, I cut down the normal stuff I have rather than going on to diet versions. Because then all you do is train, you just just get cravings. So I tend to go, basically, if I'm on a diet, I drink less Iron Brew. Or in the case at the moment, I'm currently on a diet, which is not something I advise anyone to do. Please don't. I'm on this because of professionals actually telling me this is what you need to cut out in order to lose the weight where you've got the weight. So that's it. But I'm not eating potato, pasta, or any of those things, which is annoying. Tenefelica. Hello, Michael. Hello, George Newman. Hello, Melanie, 6040. Hello, Melanie. We know the British had planned 4 N3s and 4 G3s, but the thing is that in 1921, the British planned to build 4 ships next year, I believe. Plus, there is the 1922 upgrade in naval infrastructure coming as well. Yeah. The reality is we don't know how long the British post-World War I ship was going to last, as really N3 and G3 are just scratching the surface of what the RM was planning. Yes, it's scratching the surface of what the RM was planning, but it's planning very much within what it thinks the levels of government spending can be able to be without causing trouble. Would I say Canada was a success? I would. I would say Canada was a success. Hmm. Hmm. Oh well. Speaking of Drac, I'm getting WhatsApp messages from him, so I'll sort that out in a bit. Canada was a success, I would say. Richard, what nation would you have liked to see included in the Washington Naval Treaty just for the hilarity of the unnecessary politeness, pointless reason for them being there? Oh, Russia. Russia's navy is just pointless at this point at the end of World War One, but having them actually included would have been quite funny. Oh yeah, this was the Canada trip. Left this signing. Hello, Andrew Paul. Richards, glad to see you back from vacation, Doctor. Was busy and also couldn't make it to dinner. Glad you had a great vacation. It was a lot of fun. I see. Does Iron Brew use high fructose corn syrup or cane sugar? Cane sugar. Great Dominion. What happened with your planned visit to Ojua? We had issues with getting there and various other things cropped up. They were interesting. Dashizu Vashel. Good evening. Sonic Nero. Okay, yeah, fun. Great seeing Drac and you in Buffalo. It was good to see you, Benjamin. Uh,
Half and salad.
Hmm?
Half and salad.
You're the only person I know who'd say thank you for a salad, but go away. That's disturbing talk on this live stream. Sim Richards, you talk about 25,000-ton aircraft carriers. Do Fleet Air Arm get modern aircraft early? Well, that's the interesting question. If you have more carriers, then the Fleet Air Arm are going to be ordering more aircraft. In which case, they're probably upgrading their aircraft. Do they get them early? Well, again, the trouble is often people compare the aircraft the Americans have in 1941 when they end up going to war, which mostly actually in 1942 aircraft, because basically it's 1941 December, with the aircraft the British have in 1939. So, with larger numbers of aircraft being ordered, they might well be in a better place. Especially if you've got larger carriers and they're a bigger part of the fleet. So, yeah, you might well have them far more there. This is one of the ones by Pine Martin Emily of the G3s, and that's really cool. The trip was very good. I had some clarifications about the Equitable Washington Naval Treaty. My idea is that 35,000-ton limit was taken as a method to stop warship development where it was in 1921-22. Taking a 42,000-ton limit would make most existing warships weak against these new ships. That, in turn, from my calculations on new construction, basically necessitates an entirely new fleet for the signatories by 1935 or so, keeping some of the large ships still in. For nations like France and Italy, who didn't have enough money to complete their other construction ships, building 5 and 6 large ships, respectively, by 1929 to 1931 may not be possible. The thing is, they don't need to get ships. France and Italy don't build the ships even that they're allowed to build, so that's not really a reason not to have the treaty. As for the 35,000 versus 42,000, again, there's not a good real reason for it. It's an arbitrary figure, and as a point I made, again, it's a nice idea to go, oh yes, we're stopping construction at 35,000 tons, but no one's building a 35,000-ton ship, and no one has built a 35,000-ton ship. At no point has it made sense for 35,000 tons in standard ship. So I would say 40,000 tons you could allow. And there are other ways of stopping people rapidly eradicating a fleet's viability. I.e., there is, as I said, limits on how many ships you can construct at a time, what age you can replace ships at. You can even limit your total number of ships if you want to. Actually, going to make a bold statement, but I think that the treaty limits you propose are flawed slightly. I would include an escalator clause allowing for a rise in displacement of 10% per 4 years for tech gain. I understand your idea, but I don't think they would get through. I think 3,000 tons was what was allowed for tech gain. And I think that's roughly. Okay. Just going to save a box that someone has decided to turn on the hose and soak. Thank you, sister. Sorry, I have a box sitting outside my door because it blocks the door. And yeah, my sister's just turned on the hose and was merrily soaking it. Drakenode. Richard Alter, if a European Riverine Treaty was enacted, what mess would the people overseeing it make of the boats? I'm in a silly question mode. Oh, it would just be amazingly awful. Amazingly issues. Also, this is the trouble, is trying to make the ratios equitable, because, as I said, this was the original treaty proposed by the US. This is what goes through for capital ships. This is what comes through for aircraft carriers. And this is what the average is across the two. So I tend to work with that as my basic average point. George, that is the engineer sister, right? Yes. I have long ago decided that what happens is she finishes work and turns off the engineering brain. Seam Richards, giving Japan extra ships, do they still go to war in 1941? Well, the thing is, under all this process, they get the 7, the 10 to 7 ratio, and that's something which is a key proposal the whole way through the treaty, which is what they wanted. They wanted a 7 to 10. But the British and the Americans still retain their numerical advantage, which they required of at least 6 ships superiority over the Japanese. So, yeah, the Japanese are going to feel stronger. Do they go to war in 1941? The thing is, it depends on how you game it out. So, you can game it out one way. They feel respected, they get what they want, they're able to show that there is an advantage from negotiations and and communicating with the global system, that they've got the security they need from that, and therefore they go away pleased and proud and feeling respected, and they continue to be a good interlocutor on the global stage and communicate with people. And sorry, my own mouth was getting over my tongue there. And they become a very good part of the global network, because you have to remember, Japan doesn't become the Japan we know from 1939, 41, and all the stuff in China overnight. There is the Japan of World War One, which fights by the Allied sides. There is the Japan prior to that. Yes, they don't exactly have a wonderful history, and I'm not going to call it anything but checkered. But as imperial powers go, they're not exactly the worst out there either. You know, they're out for themselves, but so is everyone else. So this is nothing new. The thing is, it's as they start to feel they are not part of the global scenario, that they are not being respected, that they're not part, that pushes them. And when I say it pushes them, it doesn't push them as in the British and Americans pushing them off to being this country. It's the Americans don't like a powerful Japan because they want the Pacific to be their version of the British Atlantic and Mediterranean. The Americans want them sort of to be a secondary power to them. And that causes enough issues. But the fact is, it's when Japan loses the alliance with the Anglo-Japanese alliance, which was a cornerstone of their foreign policy, when they then, in this treaty scenario, they don't get the respect they deserve, and they feel they deserve, and they feel like they're one of the winners, and they're being punished like they're one of the losers from World War One, and they don't feel safe because they don't get their bare minimum for safety, and that puts the pro-peace, pro-diplomacy, pro-talking out people on the back foot constantly to the people who feel like we should right this wrong with national honor. So that's the trouble. That's what you're dealing with. These things are never a one decision. They're always layers and layers of decisions that happen. Knight everyone with the mighty hood pushing the limit of over 40,000 tons. Technically 42,000 tons. Why do politicians seem to be trying to stop the natural ship development course? You have to remember there are three things that are going through the minds of most of the politicians involved in the treaty process. For many of the European powers, and to an extent for America, but not, of course, not for Japan, there is horror at what's happened in World War One. For Japan, World War One was a very successful war. Relatively few casualties, some astounding victories from their mind. They've done well. It's been a good war. From the European powers, they have watched an entire generation get mauled. And they've lost a lot of their bright young things. From the American perspective, they haven't had that great a time either, and they don't want to get involved in another European war. So all the peace camps are various out pushing and trying to outdo themselves by making this the war to end all wars. And one of their ideas is you make the battleships so weak no one wants to fight in them because everyone will lose. And that's honestly where I think the 35,000 tons comes from. And I worked up a version of the treaties myself some time back. 17, 17, 11, 6, 6 ratio on capital ships. 5, 5, 3, 2, 2 for carriers using the same historical limits. That worked out quite well for replacements. Yeah, that sounds like a good way to get into a complicated battle. Which sounds terrible to you, Anna, but it's basically the moment you have to try. One of the tenets for trying to make a treaty equitable is you have to make numbers very, very easy. So it's pretty much any combination you're going through has to result in whole numbers. So that's why I keep mine to whole numbers. So I don't like any point variance, any flavors of that sort of scenario, because they just will cause trouble. I can understand where your idea comes from, but no, it wouldn't be a good. It would cause a dispute because they'd be going, well, the ratio of 17 to 11 is 17-11, and that's not going to make them happy. So 10-10, 10 to 14. As you said, the numbers I've said as 2020 14 and working down from that. 2020 14 8 is doable. Nigerian, wouldn't a 33,000 ton limit mean the illustrious class are more likely going to be was historically the implacables? Yep. And how would a 33,000 ton limit and 6 Lexington carriers affect the Yorktown Essex? They'd be big. Hello, Rick Vasava. Hello, Grace Sosarski. Hello, Hemlinger. What is the Glyn Stewart book behind you, Professor? Glyn Stewart book behind me. 9 Stale Stars. Oh, that's the one that I'm reviewing. It's the one which is the Kickstarter. And there is a review video going to be coming out on it, but it's yeah, this is the book. This is the only copy like this in the world. Glyn produced this for me specifically for me to review, and I basically came across the Atlantic reading it. It's really good. Hi, Brandon. Richard, has anyone in the chat been fortunate enough to have the good doctor as your teacher in former classes? Ooh. That would interest me. I don't think there's anyone in the chat. It's not from the names I recognise. 6831. With the Equitable Treaty, when Hitler starts the war, which ideology demanded? Why would he risk Bismarck or Scharnhorst when the RN may have 16-inch or whatever, as it would be a suicide mission? That becomes the interesting factor. Basically, again, this is the point about the treaties. They stop construction. Now, we can talk about another period where that happens, which is by seeking to avoid the naval race, which they are blaming World War One on. Yes, there was a faction in American and even European politics who blamed World War One on the Anglo-German naval race, neatly forgetting that the Italians and Germans were willing participants in it, and that the Japanese and, of course, many South American nations were also participants in it. No, it was the Anglo-German naval race, which was fought for World War One, not the alliance system and the various other things. They forget that the race actually comes about because Britain launches HMS Dreadnought and then goes, we've built the world's biggest. Now look at us, all ye other nations, and despair. And everyone else goes, oh, they've only got one. Sheesh, they've lost their advantage. Quick, build up. We can catch them. We can catch them. Which, of course, doesn't happen. But it gives them the idea. And then you're going to start, well, here's a great thing. Let's have a treaty where we're going to stop construction completely. So it's going to make people think they can catch them or they can build new ones which are better than theirs and can replace, outperform all the predecessors. Their actions are trying to avoid that scenario creates that scenario. Mandy, what's special about that copy? It's the only one going to be produced with this design. So this back cover, everything about basically the only one produced to this design is going to be this one. So I have the sole one in the world. Richards, I would give anything to attend your class like Clausewitz. To be honest, most of the students listening to my class on Clausewitz are usually going, ouch. It's fun though. Well, from Chicago, had trouble posting. Sorry for late. How much of the British bad decision making was due to dead men from the graduating class of 1910 to 1918? Sadly, a lot of them. I'm sure it won't be that long, Betron, and I'm sure it won't be used as a doorstop or doggy chew toy. Paperweights, I'm afraid all books, were good or bad, get used as paperweights in my office. I will hold that up. They will basically sometimes when I've got big maps that are on drawings that I'm unfolding, it'll be the nearest book which will be grabbed as the paperweight. But Sim Richards, what do you mean by when you say super Leander? I basically upped the tonnage a bit. So basically, I took the Leander and went, well, what happens if I've got about 8,000 tons to do that rather than, well, yeah, that's going to be a little bit tougher than the regular Leander. So it's going to be something like with the speed of Leanders, but probably the armoring of the Amphions. I went, oh, that'll do. Now, 604, and look at the famine feast cycle that occurred when the battleships after the treaty imploded. Yep. Like, how likely is it that if the G3 or as World Warships call it, the Duncan class were built, what happens to the two Courageous class ships? If they become aircraft carriers, then the Courageous class might still be kept as aircraft carriers, but they might also be got rid of. George Newman, I thought World War I was caused by assassination and a bunch of crazy alliances. It's caused by lots of fun things. I think on. Wouldn't the Furious subclass of ship of the Courageous class of battlecruiser HMS Furious just be converted regardless, given it was half done anyway? It probably would, but how long it would hang around for, being in mind it was designated as experimental, would be an interesting question. Basically, the thing is, it probably wouldn't be cancelled. It'd probably still be converted. But the question is, when you're starting to build new ships, you might retain it, you might not. You might keep Furious, you might not. There's also the advantage that if you don't keep Furious, then you can use that tonnage for other things. And let's be honest, a Duncan class, if we're going to call the G3s in the carrier form that, which I absolutely wholeheartedly support because I would love a carrier named after Admiral Duncan, mainly because I would want its crane painted like a giant arm. And if none of you have seen my Age of Sail videos about Admiral Duncan and Camperdown, then you will not know what I'm talking about. But go watch those and you'll understand why I want the crane painted like a giant arm with Admiral's bands on them. I can understand. I often come on these long lives, these lives going information overload. Yes, welcome to what my students have for 3 hours sometimes as lectures. 3 hour long lectures? Yep. Me in the same room. And I should point out that I'm very good with all of you because I'm sat down in a chair in front of a camera because I have to be. When I'm lecturing, I'm a walker and talker, to quote one student. They can hear me perfectly because I'm quite loud wherever I am in the room, and I walk and talk. That's good, you've got it in one. World War I is caused by people who think they're as good as Bismarck not being. Nope, they're not. If you'd seen my N3 G3 rambling in the comments of the video on the 14th, how far would you rate my assessment? It's a good starting point. Admiral Duncan was a rather large chap, so a crane is not a bad representation of his arm. He's a distant relative of mine, one of those I know all too little about. It's a good one to know, man. Him going out. Is it possible to post links to your Discord server with a picture of possible North Sea battles in 1939 and a question? Yep. That is one way to get cardio. Yes, this is the other problem I have, not currently going into university to lecture as much. I am not getting the cardio. I used to average roughly 24 to 30,000 steps a day, which was fun, but must remember it included gym and teaching and walking the dogs. So actually it was kind of easy to get to. I'm now down to 12 to 15,000 a day. Once again, do you have any plans of releasing any of your books as, I'm presuming, audiobooks? There's always a hope. Are you trying to tell us your students have considered getting a collar and leashing you to the desk? Most of them have realized they should not try that, any of those things like that. This was an interesting thing to put together for the Equitable Treaty when working it out. 42,000 largest guns in service, Colorado class, 16-inch guns. Just doing it equitably made it quite an easy thing to work through. And that was something which really struck me as strange. You don't need to come up with any of these half weird assessments when you can do it quite easily. To retain a 6-ship majority, we end up with the RN-20, USN-20, IJN-14, Marine Nationale 8, and Regia Marina 8. What does this do? Well, there's actually an interesting point here, because what the Italians might have done is maintain the Francisco Caracola class and build 2 of them as battleships and 2 of them as carriers. I was reading a naval encyclopedia that called the N3's Hyper Dreadnought. Yeah, there are lots and lots of things going around about what would be what. Let's put it this way. You start off with the N3 built as it is. And then someone builds a very fast ship. And if you don't have a treaty system limiting you, and you're still building N3s, then what the British would do is probably take the N3 design and use the 1922 upgrades of infrastructure around the world and increase the size of the ship to the point at which they could get the speed with those 18-inch guns. And remember, that's actually quite easy to do on an N3, what I would call war canoe style design. So all you need to do is lengthen the hull a bit, and you can leave the guns and everything forward the same, and just go to the engine room and go, all this extra space, more power! Go Jeremy Clarkson on the engines. It works. The most complicated thing for making an Equitable Treaty was to work out these three. I spent more time on the last 3 bullet points than I almost did on the previous 3 slides from the book, from the presentation combined. Dan Freeman, would Italy be tempted to create more than 2 cavalry ship capable building ships? Probably not, but they might create another dry dock for maintenance. Which would be sensible. How hard can it be? It's kind of interesting because it's working out where you're going to cut the timings down. And basically, I came down to December, January December the 30th. All ships laid down December the 31st or earlier, 1918. Could be replaced from 1934 onwards. All ships laid down between 1919 and 1922 could be replaced from 1936 onwards, and so forth. Basically guaranteeing roughly 20 years of service. Tashi to Vashal, would it have been possible to salvage the German floating dry dock that was covered at Dar es Salaam? I'm sure it was looked at, and the fact it wasn't was probably because it wasn't economically viable. But there again, if you have more ships to maintain, yeah. Oh, ships laid down from 1418, not actually in service. Yeah, the ones in service you can get prior to then see this point here. Then they could replace any ships laid down prior to 1914 with 14-inch guns or less from 1926 onwards. Those with ships with guns greater than 14-inch but laid down prior to 1914 could begin replacing those from 1930 onwards. There you go. No worries, V-Lions Gaming. I can usually work things out, especially as a fellow dyslexic. Man Freeman, I now have divisions of the RN getting their N3s and then 10 years later plugging in an insert with more engines, lengthening a hole. But then, how could that work with the weight limits? Well, let's put it this way. If the RN have got the N3s, don't take this the wrong way, but then the weight limits aren't applying. Because if they've got those 18-inch gun monsters, it's like if they get the G3s, the weight limits aren't applying. There is no way to get this thing in under the weight limits. But under this this is a G3-led Armada Codicil Sea Dodders, which has 3 G3 carriers, 1 G3 battle cruiser, which had somehow been completed. Basically, they decided to jump straight to G3s rather than wasting time on the Admirals. And the 2 Renowns. So yeah, that's the new nightmare on Elm Street for every navy in the 1920s and 30s. It'd be a case of, you have that. Okay. Could we please request you not come anywhere near us? And why 31st of December, not 11th of November? Mainly because when we're talking about international treaties, we try not to use emotive dates. We try to use practical ones, and end of year tends to be something that people can agree with because everyone agrees roughly where the end of the year is, roughly in terms of the diplomatic and international calendar year. The fact it uses the Western one and standardized one is we'll leave to one side. It just makes things easier. That's right. Lol, YouTube just displayed a notification on my phone that you've gone live. I'm glad they have. It's nice to know that I've gone live. It's always fun when it tells you gone live, but yes, I do think I do think C Dodders did a very good one here. Certainly caused me a lot of fun to look at it. So what time zone for 31st of December? They usually don't go down that far. It's just considered that's the date. Just to be nice to people, and that's the date. Downhill, could you get the G3 to 42,000 tons, a super F3 design? Potentially, you could get a G3-ish vessel. You could get an F3 built for 42,000 tons. Richards, do you know the official steel grade of the armor? World War II era. Ooh. Not off the top of my head at the moment. I have to say, I'd search my head and went, nope, that's not coming up. It is supposed to be in there somewhere, but it's not popping up right now. I'd have to go hunt it down. Jack Ray, what tools are you used to render that? I'm not sure. You'd have to ask C Dodders. He did post them on YouTube in the Discord server for me. So mostly for busy snapping photos of my cat and Buzz. Alex has gone live. Fun times. And I'm glad you're taking photos of your cat. Right then. Nigerian. Odds are Aaron would go 1 to 4 G3s, 1 hood, and 2 renowns. Well, let's be honest, that's the sort of the worst case scenario for anyone. If the RM got a hood, a G3, 2 renowns, 3 Admiral class carriers, and 3 Duncan G3 class carriers. Let's be honest, that's 6 carriers and a veritable interesting group of 4 battle cruisers. Especially if Tiger's pottling around, because then they have 5. There's technically 5 battle cruisers and 6 carriers, but that wouldn't even be got through in the treaties. There's basically no way to get that through in the treaty. Well, there is, but you have to really want those carriers, and then you'd be sacrificing new builds later. Sorry, just watching the hose a bit. Yeah, either that or just Tetsuya Shell. Either that or just have to build too many belts that are set idle. Maybe if they claimed to have the 7-inch armor they were claiming Washington, just forget about the other in the 7-inch when calculating. It's an option. It's an option. It could be that the 7-inch belt you could have a 7-inch additional belt you can hang on the outside of the ship for wartime. Kind of like the 4-inch belt that gets produced in the counties. So anyway, the funniest thing about steel grades, a supposedly premium Japanese knife that advertises you on YouTube and costs $600 is actually made from the cheapest knife steel possible. Doesn't surprise me. Hello, quick question. Would it be possible to get a Fuso up to 27 knots by removing one or both of the midship turrets and placing it from machinery side? Yes. It wouldn't be easy, but yeah, if you're prepared to use all that space pretty much for machinery and fuel, and you replace with the highest grade pressure boilers you can get, depending on the period when you do it, let's say early 1930s, you could probably do it, yeah. Some of the older ships still get modernized? In Britain's case, I wouldn't be surprised if the QEs get modernized. But I don't think anything else does. I honestly think everything else gets replaced as quickly as it can be. Well, actually, Dan Freeman, you're sort of right on the armor working better when it's the full thickness. But there is one advantage when it's not. In that, if you've divided it up into equal sheets and you've got it slide off, instead of you having a gap which runs the whole way through your armor, because you very rarely produce it all in one milled piece, you can produce it, you can overlap it so that there's no direct gap through. Which, depending on your subdivision and construction inside, can actually give you a stronger overall performance for the whole hull. Individually, the armor itself is weaker, but the survivability of the ship itself is actually greater. Welcome to the world of naval architecture, dark arts, maths. Now, Trotsky, in that alternate reality, good luck, Russia, let alone Germany. And you must remember, Poland fights more wars with Russia in the 1920s, 30s than they do with Germany. The engineer has just realized that water from her hose is landing where the cardboard box was earlier. I can tell this because she's currently standing in my doorway taking off her socks because she doesn't want to get them wet. If you chuck those socks at me, I will get revenge. You have to sleep. I don't.
I've just left them on there for a second. I'm not being critical directly. I know now.
Knight 600. So if the British get N3 and G3, how does that affect the KGB's fast battleships? They probably never occur as they did. There might well be a KGB class, but they would look very, very different to what the KGBs historically did, and they'd be very different to what the KGBs historically were.
and remove the offensive items.
Well, that's great. I love how the application of some give and take. World War II may have been avoided. Well, as I say repeatedly, I don't think the wars themselves would have necessarily been avoided, but I don't think it would have been a world war. I think it would have been there would have been a European war and there would have been a Pacific war, and they might well have been separated by as much as half a decade, if not more. Colin Cameron, did no one in the British delegation realise the Washington Treaty was a form of economic warfare aimed at UK home industry, and did it say so at the time? Yes, a guy called Maynard Keynes does a lot. He writes a lot about how bad it is for the UK and how damaging it is. In 1919, the R-class go into the yards. In 1920, 5 new Repulse-class battlecruisers come out. How does this affect Washington, especially if they have triple turrets? If the R-class go into the yards and basically they somehow come out with, I don't know, 3 triple turrets, and they're all battlecruisers, then the Americans are having a panic attack over the Washington Naval Treaty. Because those ships go from being they now have 9 15-inch guns, which means pretty much you need at least the equivalent same number of 16-inch guns in order to match them, and they're going to be faster and they're going to be a lot more dangerous than standards. They're going to boost up the British speed of the British battle line quite considerably. But remember, again, they will be battle cruisers, not battleships. So they will the British will have a very fast mobile force for doing commerce warfare, but if they get pinned down at any point, they won't have the armor to muscle their way out and fight it. So basically, they're committing to a course form of naval warfare at the highest level. Yes, basically, it'll mean that your enemy fleet, in order to operate, will have to stay as a homogeneous fleet, because if anything spread out, they will be they'll be pounced on and wiped out. Hello, Cody. You've been married for 6 months. Hello. Why is a squadron 12 planes instead of 16? And would it work to classify CVs by aircraft carried at launch? It doesn't really work to classify CVs by aircraft carried at launch because aircraft sizes change. And therefore, your first-rate carrier in 1920 will be very different to your first-rate carrier in 1940, very different to your first-rate carrier in 1960, despite them theoretically having the same number of aircraft, because your actual first-rate carrier from 1920 could not carry the same number of aircraft as your first-rate carrier from 1960 could carry. A squadron is 12 planes, honestly, because they were designing them by linking together 2 flights, and flights were historically 6. So that's how they came up with it. There were debates about whether to make it 18, but on the carriers they had in service in 1937, 38, when they made the decision, it's easy to work out on squadrons of 12. Thank you, Melanie6. Always look forward to cat pics. Maybe the King George V in such scenario will be more like Lionel Vanguard with triple 15-inch guns. Probably. Thank you, I too. Hi, Jesse. Was that the famous economist? Yes. Hence, there are several points in the London treaties where I go, if they'd been a little bit more Keynesian in their approach, they'd been fine. And that's the other thing. You could have actually left the work to the London treaties, and you could have been saved a lot of economic damage. CPO fast forward. Planning for the future. Is it better to build a large ship close to the treaty displacement limit, or scale back to have reserve buoyancy for additions such as a Pleak armor upgunning act? Depends. Do you think you're going to do the upgunning and the pleaking armor under treaty limitations, or do you think you're going to discard the treaties to do it? Because if you consider the counties, they're obviously built with the idea that the treaties are going to cease to function, and when they actually get into combat. In fact, you could almost say the British are planning the entire time for the treaties to fail, and that affects their design. This is the Free Admirals converted to aircraft carriers, according to seized orders, along with Hood. So that's Renown, Repulse, Free Admiral class carriers, and Hood. That is by far and away the most likely, and what I consider to be options. Now, the conversion that asks the battlecruisers will not breach the treaty if they keep them within 3 2-gun turrets. To be fair, in the nicest way, the criteria was they'd be done before the treaty, so no matter what happens, they wouldn't have breached the treaty. They'd have just changed the treaty. Then, folks, while the Washington-London Treaty did not restrict rebuilds, what did the R and R's and Class and Qs look like in 1939? Does the 15-inch 45 become the problem despite needing a 14-inch for King George V? Yes, yes. And honestly, we all know what the Italians and the Japanese did to some of their battleships. If the British are not restricted in terms of their rebuild, then honestly, you might well see them all get Warspite style complete rebuilds, but with modifications added in. You have no idea how many modifications could have been added in. They could well have been 28-knot ships, all of them by the time World War II began. Seneca Nero, how many VLS cells could you fit on 35,000 tons? Well, it depends on how fast you want it to go, but probably conservative estimate will be roughly somewhere in the region of 400 full-length strategic lengths of cells. Conservative. That's including space for things like equivalent of helicopters, flex deck for drones, those sort of scenarios. Consider 831, that's a long one. Yeah, it's good for nations like USA and Japan, actually, as their stuff will be known as design World War One, whereas an N3 and G3 are post-World War One designs, which the USA would have to worry about, as well as the number 13s from Japan, as they would only find out about them as they got built. But what the bigger worry is to do with what the British built after, because, as I said, designs we know are the only the start of a building program to counter USA and Japanese naval programs. I expect the US would have been hit by the lousy time that Lexingtons and South Dakotas are coming online. The RN has its N3 laid back down, which, as far as I know, hadn't been ordered yet when they were cancelled. G3 was ordered on 24th October 1921, 19 days before the Washington Naval Treaty began. Sus, don't you think? They might have been further along than you think. Yeah, I think it's clear that the G3 and N3 was first in line on capital ships. Circle of Doom. Why Circle of Doom? I don't have Circle of Doom. No Circle of Doom for me. None at all. Interesting. Interesting question. Where is the Circle of Doom coming from? Well, would a much larger carrier force early on help either the RN to keep the fleet air arm or have great influence at least on nascent RAF? Yes and yes. Because it also might, especially if you have things like all the Admirals, which would be the largest ships in the fleet, Beatty would be obsessed with the prestige of them and would not allow them to have the fleet air arm controlled by the Royal Air Force. So they would be Royal Air Force. That's like F. They all have been 28 knot ships for the last thing. Basically, the question I had was, what would the options have been for the R class? And if the R class of the if you're allowed to do whatever you want to the R class, then they're going to be hot rotted to be, and all the R's and all the Queen Lizards will be 28 knot ships if you're allowed to do whatever you want to do. Hello, Wookie Wonders. Video froze up a couple minutes ago. Not sure why. Anyway, get back to the. I had the 9681 G3 question as well. It's not good for nations like the USA and Japan, actually, as their stuff would be known as it was designed in World War One, whereas N3 and G3 are post-World War One designs, which the USA would have to worry about, as well as number 13s from Japan, as they would only find out about them as they got built. But what bigger worry is what to do the British build after us, because as I said, designs we know are the only decided building program to counter USA and Japan's naval programs. I expect the US would have been hit by the lousy time. Lexington and South Dakotas are coming along. The RN has the N3 laid down, which, as far as I know, hadn't been ordered yet, but when canned. G3 was ordered on 24th, 1921. So, don't you think? Not really. I think they're actually further along than that. It would be interesting. Let's put it this way. My theory is that the British will have built fast and the British will have built heavy. Next generation will be fast heavy. So the next generation of British ships would be roughly 30 knot speed, rather than going for the super fast design of the G3s, but would carry the 18-inch guns of the N3s. And that would be the British fast battleship entrance, and probably cause a mass panic attack. Would a separate fleet air arm help the RAF because they can train against each other? It should do. It should do, but whether or not they actually let it help each other is a completely different matter. It's always the case of, do they actually let it work or don't they? I honestly think the Admiral class and an HMS Furious are the likely turnouts. I think that's the likely options. I do see there being a new build in there at some point, but I do see a sort of Furious coming online with her conversion. So, yeah. Basically, you have 3 Admirals replacing Courageous and Glorious. And you still have Furious, you have a new build, you have Argus, Eagle, and Hermes. So you have 8 carriers in service. You also have roughly 27,500 tons, which is going to give you a fairly decent sized carrier as your limitation is standard. Fortifications. Oh, I love fortifications. Seriously, if you want to see the most anti-Japanese thing in this entire treaty, it's the fortifications. Because it basically means Japan, you will have no strategic depth. And by the way, we're one side of the Pacific, or the other side of the Pacific from you, miles from you completely. But we have bases in your area. And, the Brits are the other side of the world, and you have to go through us to get to them to go one way, or round through their entire empire to get to them the other way. Either way, the British and the Americans are going, we don't need fortifications to fight you. You need them to fight us. Oh, and by the way, the British will get to fortify Singapore Strait, so you're not going around that way either. No. Do I have the map in here? I do have the map in here. I think the map comes up twice. This is the classic example. It's this side of this line the British can build fortifications roughly. And please note, I took a map, worked that out with a ruler, and drew a blue line on it. So that's entirely on me. But of course, they're allowed to fortify Australia. They're allowed to fortify New Zealand. So basically, these territories over here, they're not allowed to fortify. America. Limited. very limited, but there are specifics they're allowed to fortify. Which include, and of course, there are specifics which already include some other sort of battleship-looking like thing over here. And then there's all this area, which Japan's allowed to fortify their home islands, but all these Japanese territories, which are a critical part of their defense in depth, no. No, indeed. So they're basically allowed to fortify wherever they want, and Japan isn't. Yep. I can't think why Japan went away from this treaty with a huge chip on their shoulder. Sorry. But they did. Huge chip on their shoulder. I can't think why at all. It's not understandable, and the slightest, is it? I don't know. Ugh. It's a case of phrasing, as ever. Okay, now, I warn you, the engineer is now walking around me again. She's now using a bucket for protection against something. And doing fake coughing. We can all worry. Thank you. It's a case of phrasing. It is a case of phrasing, which is why I came up with this. So, the maintenance of status quo under the foregoing provisions implies that no new fortifications or naval bases shall be established in the territories of possession specified. Fine. Existing naval facilities may be modernized as appropriate as long as their total area does not increase and with full disclosure to other signatories, in order to provide for repair and maintenance of naval forces. Furthermore, any improvements made in the defense of any of those existing facilities are limited in armament to equivalency with cruisers with a maximum caliber of 8 inches. Voila! Everyone gets to feel like they're making things more secure when actually they're not. Because let's be honest, you've got 8-inch guns. They're great, but are they going to deal much damage to an aircraft carrier doing an airstrike against you? Nope. Are they going to stop a battleship's guns? Nope. Are they going to really damage a battleship at the ranges it should be engaging at, rather than when it gets absurdly close range and shows that it is actually a battlecruiser? Nope. So everyone will be happy. The Japanese could feel like they could actually fortify their islands, and the Americans could feel like they'd limited the Japanese, so they couldn't. They might as well not be fortifying them. But also, you have the Japanese spending a lot of their money and time fortifying those islands, which does keep their army busy. Vision. Fort Drum, the battleship in Manila Bay, was the last fort to surrender in 1942 and still had ammo and rations for a few months. Fort predated treaty by about 10 years. Yeah, it's great. You already have the massive, great big fortification sitting inside your major naval base in the Philippines. You don't need to build any new ones. Oh, too. What else has been out there? Could it be possible that the Courageous class might have been converted into proto supercruisers armed with 9.2-inch guns if Fisher's, I don't know, if Fisher's actually banged over the head and brought to his senses? There's always the option. That'd been good, having those as proto supercruisers. That could have changed things. They'd have been incredibly useful as that. That's a good. It's a fun treaty. Oh, the summary. Right. So, basically, you have this trouble. Put in context of World War One, the water end wars, never again. The logic was, if you don't have weapons, you won't wage war, which has never worked in history. So, e.g., Japan did not feel secure, and many felt the politicians had fatally undermined them. Britain was forced to choose between balancing the empire or posturing in Europe. America stopped building, its infrastructure withered, and it hollowed itself out. France and Italy, well, they weren't really much in it in the first place, honestly. They're not. Basically, it just succeeds in making everyone angry, weak, and frightened. Wookie wonders, did the treaty allow for gun turrets to be for scrap ships to be kept? They don't specify anything about happening to them. They could disappear. Besides, they could always be broken down into their component parts. Let's see everyone. The Italian Francisco Caracoles are really fast battleships, and if they got 4, then why keep the 2 Conte de Cavours as the third one sank and the second Andreador and 2 Andreador? It's definitely an option. So I don't know, how do you build a fleet on this treaty now with 2022 tech in 1922 world? If I've got today's modern tech, in the nicest way, if I've got missiles and carrier strike aircraft like the F-35, etc., and all that stuff, well, I'm sorry, but very quickly there's going to be no. I'm going to position like the British did with the cruisers later on. If I can use some of my capital ship tonnage for my carriers, and I'll be churning out carriers and getting rid of capital ships and flying biplanes off them as long as I can until they realize I have F-35s. And right, it's the Equitable Naval Treaties time. Hey. Alright, so, again, this is the dates of all the videos which they came out. I do apologise, some of them were recorded before I went away, before I'd figured out the sound issues, and there you go, they have sound problems. I do apologise for that. Too, I wonder if with building being allowed under an altered treaty, the Italian 50-inch battleships, the Francisco Caracoles, would have been completed or converted into carriers. Possibly a mixture of the two. As said, I did wonder if 2 might be converted into carriers and 2 built. Nice. No, France did see Italy was a rising power in the Mediterranean. They just felt that they were the risen power. There'd been a small little arms race going on prior to World War One. That's one of the reasons why the French actually start building battleships. Remember, they have an alliance with Britain. They know they can't win in a battleship race with Britain. They know they can't even win in a battleship race with Germany. The reason they start building the battleships that they do was to face off against the Italians. So, Richard, do you think your treaty would push technology quicker, e.g., radar? Probably a little bit, because it would actually allow construction. So, therefore, there's an incentive. So, would you not build a VLS barge of 45,000 tons? Well, it would have a lot of VLS, but you'd have to put other things in there. And considering your point that France Italy wouldn't build necessarily 42,000-ton ships, would there be a chance that Italy completes the Caracoles and France goes for a 9 15-inch gun layout? Leon. That is, replace the quad 340mm guns with triple 380mm guns. Potentially. That's right. Why did the British accept limits on destroyers? They didn't accept. There were virtually no limits on sloops. But it better fulfill them as many as possible, so the U-boats don't get a second happy time. Well, that's the trouble. The British accepted total tonnage limits on the whole totality of destroyers and tonnage limits on individual sloops, but there's no total tonnage limit for sloops. So yeah, the reason the British don't have enough sloops in World War II isn't because of the treaty. It's because of governments not building enough. It's down to governments, because you could build sloops of 1,500 tons quite happily, as long as they could, as many as you wanted, as long as they couldn't exceed 20 knots. Well, weren't designed to exceed 20 knots. Carried no more than I think it's 4 guns, 3-inch or greater, and were basically not able to carry torpedoes. So yeah, you could have churned out as many of those as you liked. You could have had Britain, you could have had Canada, you could have India, you could have had Australia, all churning those out quite happily from 1930 onwards. Hi, Dr. C. Would we see a modernized or a new travel class in the new treaty? New travel class. They'd be slightly bigger. Because they could be up to 2,000 tons under my treaty. Rather than 1,850 tons in standard, they'd be 2,000 tons. So they have an extra 150 tons in standard. God knows what they'd actually end up being. Well, 20 additional Wimmicks would have stopped the second happy time. Again, if you think about it, let's say you have Britain match its construction of destroyers, right? So let's say it's building 18 a year from 1930 onwards, and let's say it's building 6 in Canada, 6 in India, and 6 in Australia a year, right? You could be building 36 sloops a year. They take roughly a year to build. This is going to increase your number of your turbine production capacity, which is going to stop that being such a problem and shortage in World War II. But also, it's going to give you a huge number of escorts, because you think about it. By 1939, you'd probably have roughly 360, and by the way, the vote is live, 360 odd sloops in service. If you have 360 modern sloops with ASDIC, with depth charges, with everything else on them in service, well, you can start thinking out, going, well, let's see, how many do we put in a convoy group? Let's say we put 12 in a convoy group. Right. We now have 30 convoy groups. 30 12 sloop groups. That'll be the base of our convoys. Then we'll add destroyers and things on top of that. Welcome to your nightmare for any submarine force. If the Iron got all the sloops sooner, wouldn't they be laid up until the war starts? Probably would. They'd probably be handed over to the reserves, so the reserves would be training on them in peacetime, but they'd mostly be sitting around just being maintained. Then reweights and multi-sneaking fitted for north. Could you equip sloops with minesweeping gear? If they've got minesweeping gear, they can also be fitted with mine laying gear, so they can do mine laying. If you're going for torpedoes, you don't want something which can only do 20 knots launching torpedoes, because the nicest way, there's no way they're going to get out in time. So you probably won't do that. But they don't need to, because in the nicest way, what they will do is free up a lot of destroyers from other duties. So your destroyers will be you'll have maybe a couple of destroyers which convoy group, and they will have torpedoes. And they'll be free to go and do the hunting and killing with the torpedoes they need to do the hunting and killing of. So Richards, does the Cannon class still get upgraded armor belt later on down the line? That would depend on if the county class is built and how it's built, what it's built as. It would obviously depend on the treaty and how it's interpreted. What about the pie crate carriers? That's way down the line. That's wartime designing, and that's definitely way beyond it. Once you have got to this point where you're dealing with, let's put it this way, the treaties, I can talk about what could have happened if they had been done a different way, but I can't get too far away because that's done. You've gone too many changes away. You can talk one and possibly two changes, but you can't go beyond that. And the pie crete will be too far beyond that. You might not have honestly though, you might not have seen the investment in the pie crete designs because why would you need them? You would have enough carriers that are normal carriers. So you'd probably be focusing on those designs instead. That's good. Could you build the sloops in a 4-knot with system with more guns, possibly a torpedo round? You could do, but again, if they're designed for 20 knots, basically, if they're designed for 20 knot speed, and that's the limitation on them. So they can go. That's the limitation. Do you want them to do torpedo? Plus, here is the problem. So let's say you go right. Then I'm going to fit these sloops with the ability to launch torpedoes. That's fine. Then what are they now? They're destroyers. And if they're destroyers, then you're going to want them to do destroyer things. And what you actually want these ships to do is free up destroyers. So don't think of it as we fit torpedoes on these so we have more destroyers. Think of them as, well, they're doing the convoy escort duty, so destroyers can go do the other jobs that we do need torpedo launchers for. So don't think of it as, oh, we've suddenly got to make second-rate destroyers out of these sloops. No, you don't need to. You need them to do their jobs very well. And their jobs as sloops will be the anti-submarine warfare vessel, which you don't need those torpedoes for. And then someone will turn around and go, well, what happens if they're dealing with surface radar? Well, usually convoys would have a light cruiser. And in this case, would probably still have a couple of destroyers and a light cruiser or something with them to deal with a surface radar. Plus, if there's another larger surface radar around, there's going to be something bigger. But also, let's think about it from the perspective of, let's say you're dealing with a German surface radar. Okay. If you've got a pack of 12 sloops, and they're all carrying four 4-inch guns in twin turrets, in twin mounts, plus 40mm cannon, plus whatever other gear they have. Well, that's going to be a lot of firepower. That's suddenly you're talking about 48 4-inch guns pointing in the direction of your lovely, lone raider. Yes, it might have a 6-inch guns. It might have torpedoes. But is it going to take them out quick enough to defend its unarmored self from being taken out? No. And the odds are those won't be alone because, again, you've freed it up so much you can have a couple of destroyers with them as escorts. So suddenly it's got to deal with them firing out of the smoke with their radar-directed guns because sloops get radar just as quickly as destroyers do. And you've got to deal with the fact that there could be destroyers making torpedo attack out of the smoke at you as well. And that's your problem. Plus, think about all that AA defense for convoy movements and movements of merchant ships. Suddenly you've got all these ships providing 4-inch AA gun support for them to deal with any Stukas and things coming in from Norway, which is going to cause less destroyers to be lost to things like Gurkha, etc. in World War II. So this thing would have a cumulative build. Could we have seen enough investment in the Maltazan? Well, basically, you would be building ships for which they would be one removed of the Maltas anyway. Because if you think about it, 27,500 tons or more as your standard tonnage for your carrier is going to get you most of the way to an audacious class. So you built, and the Maltas are the next generation, actually. The ones you build in wartime once you're free of treaty limits. So you might well have the Maltas, or rather Malta equivalents built. You don't need the torpedoes on sloops to keep anti-surface raiders honest, as said. You don't need them. You have enough firepower. Children, Buffalo and Erie County Naval Military Park has announced a live stream from tonight at 2000 hours. That'd be cool. 0100 hours GMT. Dirt Squad, my thinking with a torpedo was more of a thing to make a surface raider hesitate in attacking a convoy. The only reason I could see for a torpedo tube on a sloop is if ISW torps were developed earlier. So think of a sloop as an updated flower rather than a downrated destroying console. Pretty much. Think of a sloop as being a warship grade flower class. That's the difference. That's what you're building. Seriously, what percentage of GPR would Britain need to build to your treaty? Very little more than what they were already spending. Honestly, again, when you consider what's going to sound strange is if you're building this treaty, you're going to keep a lot more of the shipbuilding industry going. You're going to keep a lot more of the people employed. So instead of playing in employment benefits and dealing with some of the worst points of the depression, you would have actually more employment, which could then, which is actually what Maynard Keyes was suggesting, and that would enable you to. You'd be spending probably the same amount but less ways, and you probably have a better placed economy and industry to deter conflict. Ultimately, the odds are you have a stronger force, you're more likely to deter conflict, and it's cheaper to deter conflict than fight a war. And as Carl Gaza points out, anti-submarine torpedoes, they can be launched from fixed depth tubes. I now have visions of a horde of 4-inch gun sloops doing their best impression of a 40k Imperial Guard force. Think of it more. How do I put this? It depends on how you mount the 4-inch guns, right? So, if you take it sort of Bitten style, you could well find yourself also with hedgehog launchers up forward. So you could have the double fours mounted up in a sort of B turret position, with the hedgehogs mortars mounted down in A, and depth charges up the rear with the 4-inch gun in X. And you probably find yourself with some pom-poms as well on them. And they'd be very, very pretty cool. And if you can imagine Sackville, she has a single 4-inch gun. She has this, that, you think about what the sloops have. Imagine that built, the Corvettes have. Imagine what a sloop has. I've got actually a picture of a sloop in here somewhere. Yeah, this is a sloop. This is Bridgewater. 1,045 tons. Seriously, would we get gun-wielding Spitfire in your opinion? If you have a larger fleet air arm, you probably have the Royal Navy get control of the fleet air arm more early. So the odds are you do get some kind of fighter aircraft. Would it be the Gullwing Spitfire? That one I can't be 100% sure, but if you're going with that was the one which was being developed, so yeah, you could well get the Seafire, which would have been the Gullwing Spitfire. Which would have been a very interesting aircraft to have in the service. So no, 3,000 tons sloops would be scary. Remember, they don't have to be 3,000, they can only be up to 2,000 tons. So you'd probably be building a 1,500 ton ship. In standard. They'd be capable assets. They would not be. the thing that people often point out, to go, well, if you started building them early, then they wouldn't be ready for, they wouldn't be available in wartime because they would have been out of date. Well, actually, no. Their requirement is to mount Aztec and move slowly. That stuff would not be out of date. Their requirement is to be able to have enough power to be able to support a radar. That stuff would be easily put in. Amethyst was sloop, right? Yes. She was a Black Swan class. Modified Black Swan from memory. So very, very capable vessels. Basically consider what I was trying to explain to people is to consider corvettes and frigates are in World War II are commercial build versions of sloops. Sloops are what you build, the Black Swan class especially, are what you build if you really want to go after submarines. And that's what you could have been building. You would have been building lots of basically Black Swans. What's 92? Well, you're saying so you were supposed to get the Griffin. Well, originally it was supposed to get the Merlin. Then it was changed to the Griffin. Then it was changed to the Sabre it was going to get. So the point is, again, if you have a larger fleet air arm, they probably start ordering earlier. They might well have got the Merlin earlier. And again, they might have got the Griffin earlier. They might have got something. There's a good chance they could have got things earlier. Now, Siren, what did the RN do to counter the 28,000-ton Italian Francesco Caraclogos? So the French has nothing to counter them, and the lines are too slow, and they're going to face the Francescos. The British probably smile. Look, if we consider the scenario where they get built, then that's probably where the very nice Nelsons, which are built to Nelrods, which are built to roughly 40,000 tons, turn up, because they'd be probably 40,000 tons version of the F3s with 9 16-inch guns and 29 plus knots to go. Hello. I think the FAA is maybe better off ignoring Merlin and monopolizing Britain's supply of radials. They might well have done that. Again, they could have done that and could have got a radial engine for it. You don't know what they'd have got. It's one of those things. It's easier to predict in the abstract than the finite. So I can say they would have been larger, so therefore the odds are they do get a fighter. Can I predict the exact details of that fighter? No. Can I say it was probably going to be that? Well, considering they have already an existing relationship with the people who are behind Supermarine, hence the name Supermarine, etc., then it probably will be similar to them. It'll be judging if those people are still in the same place, they probably be wanting to trust them. In which case, they'd probably still be designing a fighter. If they have the same ideas on Gullwing aircraft, then they probably have a Gullwing fighter. So probably that's where it is. But what engines it is, who knows? Again, Britain, which has a fleet air arm which has been dealing with larger carriers, will be dealing with have been making larger engine orders. That could, especially if the Royal Fleet Air Arm has been independent from the Royal Air Force, they will have been asking for more higher horsepower engines the whole way through. So that means, in the nicest way, the Merlin engine we could be talking about at the beginning of World War II could well be a far higher horsepower than the Merlin engine existing was, because you'd had the push of the Fleet Air Arm constantly going, we want more power, we want more power, because we're not going for multi-engine aircraft, we're going for single-engine aircraft, which means we need as much power as possible. Could we get Yatras Yukon out of the treaty? Well, you could, but you might also be getting a lot of larger carriers, in which case they could well be Ark Royal size air group and maintenance support with illustrious class level armor, in which case you don't need Unicorn. Duck 95, the odds are you don't build Hoods Admiral class, because they'd already been cancelled, but they might be converted to carriers, as said. And why would you build Renowns? You can build new ships. Renowns are now several generations behind, so you wouldn't be. It's one of the once you get into these treaties, you start going, well, the Washington Treaty is quite easy to play with because it's there. The options are being debated. Was Unicorn part of the carrier displacement? That's an interesting debate to have. Interesting debate to have. Well, remember, she's technically a forward fleet aviation support ship. Which there are, if I go to this one again. Now, where am I going to? I am going to a very specific section in the Washington Naval Treaty, in the London Naval Treaty. For that question. No, we don't want that. 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 No, 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 no. Want to get auxiliaries? Yes. Now, here is the interesting debate. There is a debate whether HMS Unicorn, as designed, fits in the category of being auxiliary. Remember, she's called a forward aviation support ship, and Henderson is quite simply trying to define her as an auxiliary. Which also explains why if I remember correctly, she has 4 Admiralty feed drum boilers, 40,000 shaft horsepower, 2 shafts, and she's designed for a speed of, you guessed it, 24 knots. So she's not designed for a speed greater than 28 knots. She wasn't designed for protection by armor plate, but it was built in. It was surprisingly quickly fitted into the design as they were constructing her, due to the change in scenario. Is she designed adapted primarily for operating aircraft at sea? Well, no, she's operated for primarily maintaining aircraft at sea, which is why she was supposed to have structures, etc., and limiting her. Basically, there's a lot of debate going on as to whether or not she's an auxiliary vessel or aircraft carrier. Now, as said, for the London Treaty, I had to do a bit more playing around than I did previously. And the playing around was pretty much, as you can see, left the Wall Street crashing because you can't change major events and keep it alive. Had John Maynard Keynes be a bit more listened to, and made it Baldwin rather than MacDonald win the election because, well, MacDonald is the one who pushes through the Yorks. Yeah. He's otherwise a very good Labour leader and a very good Prime Minister of the UK, but yeah, he and I are not going to be pals because of that one. And good Lord, what's she up to now? Oh, it's so terrible having an engineer in the family. Alright, for the US, it's a case of Hoover or Smith, and I went with Smith. I do. I wonder if with more and larger carriers around, some of the smaller ones might be used for amphibious warfare experiments with autogyros and like. Potentially. Wasn't Nature Invincible technically a through-deck cruiser? Yes. That's right, 6A for one. If Britannans can't stand up to British 15-inch guns, and they have zero hope against the Italians, and can't have hope for Leon and Normandy to fare much better. Rambling too much? It's basically not giving me a good time for them. And that's it. Wouldn't the Great Kanto earthquake make most things? They always do. Founders UFO. Equitable Naval Treaties. Must be a fantasy discussion. I wouldn't call it fantasy. It's a case of it's evaluating where what happened in the treaties and why, from a scenario of what would have been an equitable treaty. So therefore, where does it differ from that sort of equitable line, and therefore why does it differ? Because if you're looking at treaties and you just go, well, they're just bad, you have to explain more than why they're bad, which means you have to have some sort of standard to compare them to. Which is why, in international relations terms, it's quite normal to work out what an equitable treaty would be when looking at past treaties. And go from the best information available in terms of what the sides want, try and divide something which meets as much of that as possible and as you can get through, and then compare and contrast them. I guess so, but fantasy, I guess it's probably a jest, but I also like to explain that because it's one of those things you get into in history and etc. There are people who make a lot of fun of what if scenarios, and there are a lot of problems with them when they start to go down. One of the things you will hear me often say a lot is, I can't predict that far because, that's too many decision points away from where I started, or things like that. Because of my training, that's where I self-limit to. But it's also still a useful skill to do, and this is one of the interesting things with me, because I started off in history. I then did my master's in international conflict, so I did an MSc, so I did social science and that side. And then I did my PhD in war studies, which is a mixture of history, international relations, and all sorts of things put together. And you sort of start to go, well, hang on, I can mix up. So my approach is often a combination of history and international relations. And in history, you look at the treaty and you just go, this is what they said and why, blah, 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 blah. In IR, you go, well, here's an equitable treaty. This is where it differs, and this is why. And when I try and combine the two. So whenever I'm evaluating a treaty, even if I don't tell you I'm evaluating a treaty this way, I will follow this same policy. I will write out what would be an equitable treaty based on the information I have. And then I will be comparing it and adjusting it to that. And working out, well, hang on, why is it differed from that point? Because that allows me to try and think of what's going through their minds. Because one of the biggest problems you have with history is people don't write enough stuff down. They really don't. They do not write it down. They don't. They never write it down. It's stuff you don't need to write down. Admiral Henderson, when he's asking for ships to have a certain amount of space for the seamen's quarters, for their lockers, and he's saying, I want the standard locker space, or a slightly larger locker space for the sailors on this ship, you sit there and go, you haven't specified what locker space is. That's because he doesn't need to, because it's pretty much standardized and everyone knows from shipyard to yard how big a locker's supposed to be. Because it's supposed to fit a certain amount of things. And it doesn't get specified. It doesn't need to be. But that means it's not written down. So the only times I can... This is why when I was on Sackville, when I was on Haida, when I go on board Belfast, etc., sometimes I take a sneaky tape measure with me and I start measuring things. Why? Because it's not written down. It's the same with treaties. They do not... All their instructions are not written down. The amount of instructions which are verbal, which, especially the stuff when it's being intelligence-led, is never written down, so no one else can ever find it. So how can I work out where it's come from if I how do I work out where it's come from? Well, I start off with what are their sort of stated aims, and I develop a treaty according to that. And then I look and go, hang on, which way does this? Who is this benefiting, and why? And then you have to start and factor things in that way around. Thank you, I found super. I don't. Thank you. It's nice of you to say I don't have to justify it for you, but I justify it for other people. So that is why you start off with an equitable treaty. That is why you also when you're doing a ship design, this is a really good. This is a trick. Okay, if you want to do this on current ships, this is how you do it. Look at the stated requirements for a ship. Okay, and then look at the ship that's built. Using the stated requirements, design your ship that fulfills those requirements. Work out what it would need. And then look at the capabilities of the ship that's built. And then look at it and work through and go, well, why are you different? Where are the differences? If they match, you've got a great ship. If they're within a certain percentages of each other, which might be cost related, you're probably getting the best value for money you can. But if there are some very big differences going on here, it suggests people have been lobbying people, doesn't it? It suggests someone's been making a very strong case for something to be included, some component to be included that you might not have been included, or something else has been added in which hasn't been mentioned. And that's how you work it out. Don't get me started on Versailles. Versailles is absolute terrible treaty once you start going through it. If anyone wants to, this is another fun project to do with Versailles. Design an equitable version of Versailles and then look at how different Versailles is to an equitable version of Versailles. Just look at it. And you'll be just going, oh my sugar. It's basically, oh my cruiser. Frigating hockey sticks. This has gone wrong. Richards, does the tanker fleet improve, e.g., bigger, faster? Again, if the ships they're supporting are going to be bigger and faster, then they will have to be bigger and faster. So yes, they will do. If they don't improve and are not bigger and faster, then you don't need to build them bigger and faster, do you? Jason, I think the challenge is whether a treaty is economically viable. Would the public pay for these programs? I'm not sure. Viators feel defense is a waste until something else starts shooting. That is certainly the modern perception, but I don't think that's the perception in the 1920s and 30s. And I'm fairly certain, especially when you consider, in many ways, in the British public, they regarded World War I as a failure of deterrence. So if this has been marketed as a treaty which is preserving deterrence, again, it's also very much structured as you're going to be building a maximum of 2 battleships every 2-year period, which is one a year, basically, two over a 2-period. For it, you're not going to be using a lot of your money for ship construction. You're going to be using enough that you're going to be keeping a lot of people employed, which is going to make a lot of people very happy that way. Sorry, fly was annoying me. Listen, often in some key decisions, we are very deliberately not writing stuff down because political parties do not act in good faith and politicians don't want to tell people what they really said. Yep. Tasha Vachel, given the standards of time, Versailles is pretty fair. Not, well, it depends what standards of time you're comparing it to. If you're comparing it to some of the treaties Germany imposed, yes, you can say it's fair. But actually, compared to the Carnegie formula and the various treaties which have been imposed in the Napoleonic Wars, etc., it's very not fair. And the Napoleonic Wars are, well, if you consider the period of peace that comes after them, they're probably the gold standard in how to design an equitable treaty. They aren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they're about as close to equitable as humans ever get. And please note, an equitable treaty is otherwise known in international terms as the impossible treaty, because no one will ever provide a perfectly equitable treaty, because people always play to their strengths to an extent. That's around 681. Alfred Smith's Catholicism was a factor in why he lost in 1928, as there was widespread anti-Catholic sentiment, but he was anti-Nazi and helped get action carry through. Yeah, I think getting basically it's the case of shoot down the anti-Catholic sentiment and he wins. Founders UFO. Canada split an uninhabited island with Denmark. It's a perfect treaty. Is it? Have you read the small text? And also, this is the point I would make. It's a perfect treaty for Canada and Denmark. What about the native inhabitants, if they're wondering, who might make use of the island, and the other people who might have ownership of that island? And is it really a perfect treaty when the Canadian Navy and the Danish Navy have been exchanging alcohol on that island for many, many years very happily, and now they no longer will be exchanging alcohol? So is it really a perfect treaty? It stopped the Danish and the Canadian navies being able to exchange alcohol and conduct their friendly relations, which they have been doing for many, many years. It's divided up land which previously was not divided, which means for native populations, if they decided to go and live there, if they move, for whom that area is, if there is a problem for it, that will have to be sorted out with international relations, which is always fun. And it's taken a lot of taxpayer money to sort out something which, honestly, could have been sorted out decades ago quite quickly. Is it a perfect treaty? Take care, Paul. So it's like a bit like when all politicians in the UK put stick notes on the outside of files so instructions won't be on record. Oh, I hate those notes. As I ranted over your LNT video, which certainly you've seen, the quadruple 14-inch was a mistake, and the triple 15 was clearly the correct decision that Chatfield should be roasted over the coal for by not choosing triple 15. The thing some people pointed out is that the triple 15 design would have used similar technology as the quadruple 14. The point is, actually using that same technology for the triple 15 would have been amazingly less complicated to implement than the quadruple 14, because you always have to remember, one gun is this many problems, two guns twice as many problems, 3 guns 4 times as many problems, because you have how they all interact with each other. 4 guns 8 times as many problems. So you basically halve the problems if you cut down from 4 to 3 guns. And because the British had already been through the issues of sorting out triple guns before with the Nelsons, they would have been actually that much step further. So it would have been actually even easier than that. Wookie wonders just how much much the King George V's having treble 9 15-inch guns would have changed their services. It would have probably meant they entered service earlier and they would have been available quicker. And honestly, if you have the treble 15 turrets, you might end up with Vanguard actually having 12 15-inch guns rather than 8. But the fact is, treble 15s would have had them in service quicker. Logistically, would have made it far easier to deploy them further, because one of the reasons why they're tied to the UK for much of the war is because where are the 14-inch shells? People often forget that. They go, why aren't the King George V's here? because deploying the 14-inch shells is quite dramatically difficult. It's one of the problems when they send the Prince of Wales out to the Far East. There's a case of there will be shells following you. They won't be there when you get there. You'll have a full load, but that's all you'll have. Ouch. Whereas treble 15-inch guns, they have plenty of shells all around the place. So you might well have seen them enter service quicker. And then you have the fact that, okay, let's say Prince of Wales, treble 15s, they, as said earlier, instead of it being 8 times as many problems, it's 4 times as many problems, but also that then's reduced because they've dealt with a treble turret before, so they understand some of the issues they're going to get, which will shoot the problems down. Means you're more likely to have all the treble turrets, or at least most of the treble turrets, working, which means instead of you being taken down from 10 to 2 guns, you probably have all 9 guns, or at least 6 of the 9 guns working, and engaging the Bismarck, in which case she's getting hit by 15-inch shells. Also, here's the other advantage. If you go with the 15-inch design, you're developing the 15-inch 45, which can take the old shells, but can also take the new shells you designed for it. So you can upgrade all the existing ships. So you could upgrade Hood, you could upgrade the Rodney, you could upgrade all the R-class, all the battleships with 15-inch guns up to 15-inch 45s, which could give you a major boost, a major advantage in terms of engagement. So that would have meant that the Bismarck would have been taking on 17 15-inch 45 guns, which again could have had a difference and could have also led to some differences in operations. Hans Island, as Venezuela, it's close to perfect. It's close to perfect. Yeah, it's close to perfect. But yeah, I'd still say it's not the perfect treaty because the Royal Canadian Navy and Danish Navy aren't still swapping alcohol and they're enjoying that one. Nick Waters, did the French 2x2 quad mount help a lot in that sense? No, it didn't. In fact, it made it arguably worse in some respect because it cut down on space inside the turret. But not much help, because if something pierced the turret on one side and blew it up, the odds are it would get through the thin bit of metal they had in the middle of the turret. So there wasn't much help other than creating more compound and more compound and fragments. And yeah, still the same issues. Yeah, it just wasn't help. Tasha Rochelle, I'm curious, have you ever looked at the videos of Tick? Recently covered Keynes. I possibly. But I studied Keynes a long time ago. Keynes I studied at bachelor level and masters. I occasionally teach him a bit. Economics of war, economics of conflict and deterrence. It's an interesting module to be part of. Borgio, 15-inch Mark II, different shell. They were for the 45. They were also developing a new range of shells. They could take the older shells, but they were getting a new range of shells as well. Improved shells, they decided. Fanders UFO. What difference does it make for World War II if there are no treaties that restrict naval builds? I think the Allies still win, but it might take longer. Honestly, I think it would take less time because the Allies probably build more. This is the thing with the Allies. If there's no treaty limits, what's the first British governments tend to respond the moment there's an economic crisis? Start building warships. It's a good way to employ people. So the British have been through a building construction program in the early 1930s. With the rise of threats, they probably just keep it going. They're not doing a crash build program, which is expensive, but doing a standardized build program, which keeps going, which they can keep costs under control of. and is going to be economic benefits. Same with the Americans might well have started construction, in which case Japan cannot match their build. Germany has no chance in Hula, and Italy doesn't either. Okay, France is probably still left behind, but let's be honest, a lot of the size of the Royal Navy that you probably have in 1939 with no treaty versus the size of the Italians and the Germans would be absolutely laughable. Because what would the British be building? They'd probably be building, increasing their destroyer build. Instead of them building 18 roughly a year, they'd probably be building something like 27 to 36 a year. So they'd be replacing all the V&Ws with new build ships. Would they build more sloops? I don't know. They might do because they won't be thinking about it, and there'd be extra things they could build, but probably not. They'd certainly be building more cruisers, so you'd have more of them in service. So think of that as the C's and D's probably wouldn't be in service, and E's probably wouldn't be in service by World War II because they'd all been replaced by new builds. And again, you'd probably have far more advanced new battleships under construction. They'd all probably be 16-inch ships, especially if you start from the G3s and N3s. If you think about it, you'd probably be dealing with about 3 generations of battleships and battle cruisers, or 3 generations of capital ship, let's say, between World War One and World War Two for the British and for the Americans. Whereas the Germans wouldn't have been able to build anything thanks to the Treaty of Versailles. So then the Germans come out and go, "Yay, we've got an 11-inch battleship," and the British are going, "Yay, ours have got 18-inch guns. Do you want to come and play?" At which point the Germans go, "We're going to build a 15-inch battleship, or we're going to work on an 18-inch gun. Great, we'll see you when you actually build it." Also, you then have the thing that the industry, etc., for the Allies will have been still constructing. So instead of it all being sold off and destroyed and having to be rebuilt, it would actually still be in existence. So Britain would be able to ramp up construction far easier. The same with the Americans. So it would be actually less costly to mobilize for war. Well, too. I wonder how many issues the Quad 14-inch could have been sold quicker if the KGBs had 3 quads. It's debatable. It really is debatable. It's potential, but it's debatable. Probably not. Probably still going to be very, very problematic. Because as I said, 1 is 1 level of problems, 2 is double the problems, 3 is quadruple the problems, 4 is 8 times the number of problems, as a rule. Man, would the old destroyers be sold to the South Americans in this scenario? Would the South Americans want them? They like to buy new destroyers at this point. The old destroyers might be given to Australia and Canada, but they'd probably also be buying their own as well. Buying new ones as well. So that's the thing. That's the other problem. With the treaties, we always think about how it limits Britain, but it also limits Canada, Australia, India. If you don't have the treaties, you're probably building up those nations' navies as well. Seriously, what gun do you use on early 30s destroyers? Because 4.5 inch is not around. 4.7 inch. It's what they put on them anyway. But again, if you're building more destroyers, you're going to have more money being put into development of guns, so you might get the 4.5 inch earlier. This is, again, it's a decision beyond a decision beyond a decision. I can see the logic behind it, but whether it happens or not, I can't predict. No one can. Yeah, there is a debate over the quadruple turrets. And I think, God, don't give me a blunt. Would Draskanos would have had to be free triple 15 from the start to be even viable. And the thing is, the Germans couldn't build 15-inch guns. They don't go with 11-inch guns for the Shanos because they want to. They go with the 15-inch because the 11-inch because they have to, because they have no other options. That's their problem. That's what they're dealing with. Tertiary Rochelle, what do you make of the American design for sextuple turrets on some of their designs? I refer you to the figure. 1 is one set of problems. 2, double problems. 3, quadruple problems. 4, 8 times the problems. 5, 16 times the problems. 6, 32 times the amount of problems. Why in the name of all things holy would you do that? Why? Wookie Runners, why did the British put the 14 forward? They did not use 14, Neville. We won't get it. The whole debate on the 14 inch is just absurd. Some of the stuff Chatfield brings up. At one point, he's talking. Let's put it this way: he's getting very close to using the phrase "machine gun battleship." And I said, why were they unable to build 15-inch guns? Because they lost all the facilities to build 15-inch guns as part of the Treaty of Versailles. And you have to remember the 15-inch guns which the British have on the Mark 1s are steel wire 15-inch guns. The ones they were planning on 45s would have been steel guns rather than wire, would have been sort of solid guns, like they did for the 14-inch design. So the Germans didn't really have the ability to build the old pattern ones, so they had to didn't have the old pattern ones. So they had to build they were limited to building 11-inch guns because that's all they had a facility for. So they built them, and then they worked out the design for the 15-inch gun, which is a completely different gun to the 11-inch. I mean, it shares basically nothing at all. Seeing Richards, how quickly do we see fast battleships? I would say the generation beyond G3s and N3s would be fast battleships. Assart the goat. Presumably you make a suitable thing out of boon that will soon descend on your problems. Yeah, that's the theory, but the trouble is the problems are going to be your own turrets. The odds are your turrets go boom before the enemy does. I agree, but how did the US designers overlook those problems? What is the lack of communications with people who would expect to work the guns? Yes, and a lot of politicians involved. If I remember correctly, the sextuple guns are part of the very special series inspired by a certain senator. So, nicest way, no. Steel wire being wrapped tubes? Yes. G3s are battle cruisers in an N3 battleship world. Again, you always have to remember there is a certain relationship between the battle cruisers and the battleships. The thing about the hoods is the Admiral classes, their equivalent battleships aren't built, so we don't see what they would be. And the G3s are supposed to be battle cruisers in a world where the N3s are battleships. Which, and let's be honest, the N3s are pretty much a floating solid block of steel, which has just had just enough of it milled out to mount engines and fix the turrets. Otherwise, it's pretty much as solid as it gets. But compared to the density of an N3, a G3 is a battlecruiser. And that's the point. this is the point about the evolution I make, and the point about the sort of the design. So if you had still got ships in construction between World War One and World War Two, you'd have had 20 years of generations of battleships. So you probably have at least 3 generations of battleships. So because they probably roughly 6 to 7 years per generation for them to go through before they make the next leap and the next leap. So the battleships you would see being fielded by America, by Britain, by Japan in World War II would be as far removed from Dreadnought as, I don't know, Nelson and Rodney are from Dreadnought. Hood is from Dreadnought. And, by the way, while that's doing, Germany wouldn't be building a single battleship. So Germany's battleships would just slip even further behind. Actually. Mm-hmm. Andrew Paul, if Chatfield really wanted a machine gun battleship, why not go something? Because the 14-inch was really the lowest you could go for on a battleship and still maintain a battleship. And the trouble is, here's the point. I know I get into trouble with this. There's a couple of people who keep going into Alex, you sound like you're talking about top trumps. And the thing is, I'm not. I keep comparing heavy cruisers that were built compared to what heavy cruisers should be and pointing out that they are really just light cruisers. And that is what they are, because they are based on a light cruiser design, because that is what the Hawkins limitations were. They were supposed to be large light cruisers, they weren't heavy cruisers, or armor cruisers, or anything like that, and then suddenly they become the basis for a heavy cruiser. But with battleships, there is a status thing. There is a reason why the British are so desperate to build Nelson and Rodney with 16-inch guns. It's not because the 16-inch gun is wonderfully, amazingly better than the 15-inch. It really isn't. It's a status symbol. Battleships are your capital unit assets. They are status symbols. They are a nation-state equivalent of turning up and turning up at someone's house party in a Ferrari, and a bright red one at that. They are you showing off your capabilities as a nation. And if you aren't building it with the biggest, bestest gun you can, you just aren't doing it right. Again, Chatfield, moron. When it comes to battleship guns, definitely moron. That's it. What was it equal to the Admiral class battlecruisers? Believe it or not, there were designs. There would have been battleship. There was a battleship design out there, but they were building battlecruisers first because that was considered more important in the post-World War One environment. Because that's what they were building the admirals for. They weren't building admirals for World War One. They knew World War One was going to end 1918, 1919, because they knew just how successful their economic blockade of Germany was. Remember, they understood because they saw how successful the Germans had almost been on them. So they knew what was going on in Germany. No, they were building those battle cruisers with an eye to what comes next. The world that they'd have to fight next. Were the 46mm 45s also wire wrapped? I think so. Remember, yeah. Andrew, what will the battleship contemporaries of the Admiral class look like? 10 times 15-inch guns? Or possibly 8 16-inch guns and 23-inch knots? Or 8? You're mostly looking at roughly 25 to 28 knots. You're mostly looking at, you're pretty much right where the 16.5-inch gun comes in. It's an 8 16-inch gun or 10 15-inch. Seems to be the odds that are going for them. That's good. Also, according to the Royal Navy time, G3 goes about 25 knots, so battle cruiser. G3 is definitely the battle cruiser. That is what it is designed to be. The entry is the battleship. No one has to remember the H-44 design. They would never manage to build the H-44 design. No one has to mention it. Richards, how many tribals do you build? If I don't have a treaty limit, 2,000-ton tribals get built. A lot of them. They sort of look like They sort of look like daring class. We'll leave that on one side. I start the goat, and if the Tillmans have been built, what would the British answer been like? Probably a lot of giggling, and then a lot of end freeze or evolved end freeze, which would have been slightly. The end freeze would have been the end free design would have been extended a bit to make it faster, and then left with the 18-inch guns just to go. Hello, we can dictate the range of engagement, the time of engagement, and also we will be dictating the distance of the engagement because our guns can shoot further. Just enough, just far enough that we can, deal with you at longer range. Colin Cameron, with 20 years of battleship advances, one wonders about the arm metallurgy and what it would mean for tanks. It would have been interesting. IO2, would those Admiral Company BBs have Dido-style triple stack 15-inch stars? No. Alex, what rate of fire advantage does one get by going 14-inch over 15 or 16-inch? You get an entirely theoretical, not actually in reality anywhere near operational advantage of theoretically being able to get one more round off in a certain time versus the others. The reality is it doesn't work out like that in battle, so in nicest way, it's nonsensical. Nice segment. Where can I find out about BBC supposed to be alongside the Admirals? National Archives and Q. Only time I've seen any mention of them. Also, there was the British Battleships book, I think, which had something in them, but I can't remember. There are design programs going on. Look, 20-inch guns are a lovely idea. The only people who could actually probably have built 28-inch guns, and I actually have the industry and ability to actually build them, would be, again, Britain and America. The odds are each would have built about 3 ships with 20-inch guns, gone, oh my lord, this is an inefficient weapon system. It's so freaking slow to load. It looks great on the status symbol, but oh, we all actually hate them. And then quietly start building triple 18-inch turrets and go, well, the reason we haven't gone 20 inches is because, you just can't, you can get more out of the 18-inch guns. As at Foxo, I refer you to my earlier video where I described that particular placement of gun as the most stupid placement of a gun ever known to mankind. Mainly because it is one of those engineering ideas which is theoretically a brilliant place to put a gun. Engineering-wise, it allows you to balance things out, and it's a great placement for a gun. Operationally, pragmatically-wise, it's really not. And there is a reason the Nelson and Rodney end up the way they do, and there is a reason the F3s are designed the way they are, and there's a reason I honestly believe that the G3s would have been built differently than they're designed. And so, Alex, so you have the advantage of smaller shells. basically the theory behind the 14-inch versus 16-inch is the same theory that works behind the 6-inch versus the 8-inch gun, which leaves to aside the whole problem, the whole difference between the 6-inch versus the 8-inch gun. You can build a triple 6-inch gun. You can build a 6-inch gun will fire faster than your 8-inch gun at a significant rate of fire. But the trouble is, once you're dealing with 14-inch and 16-inch shells, they are still so big and freaking heavy, they are not going to. No machinery in the world is going to make it that much faster. So with 6-inch and 8-inch guns, there is actually a big difference in terms of display weight. And you can, by especially having a triple turret, a 6-inch turret, actually really ramp up your rate of fire on your fixed tonnage limit and achieve victory that way. It doesn't work the way with 14 and 16-inch guns. But that is Chatfield's thinking. Chatfield's thinking literally goes to, but we can do this with the 6-inch and the 8 versus the 8-inch cruiser. And you can almost mentally hear Henderson going, I work for this particular individual. Wookiee Wonders, new book for you. Royal Navy that should have been put in back to World War II. Could be fun. Thatcher to Rochelle. Didn't Chatfield admit it was his experience at Jutland that made them to make bad design choices for the 1950 ships? Amazingly enough, all the other admirals trying to make the choices were advising him not to do that, and he was insisting he knew what was right. I'm Freeman, quietly put 20-inch guns on monitors if you do end up London, son. Flagships. Basically, you'd have the 20-inch around because that's guaranteed to scare everyone in a diplomatic meeting. What caliber would the 20-inch gun be? 45. So the ratio of it doesn't work. The equivalent of 6 inches to an 8-inch for a 16-inch is probably the 12-inch. Still, no, it doesn't. Once you get into battleship level guns rather than cruiser level guns, the weights go up quite dramatically, and the amount of machinery involved in their movement and preparation goes up quite dramatically. And this is the problem. Nice ignorance. So this battleship would have looked like Hood with a turret and midship, right? No. Imagine it more as a relationship between Hood being the renowned equivalent of its battleship, but the battleship being built more to Queen Elizabeth class styling and design rather than renowned a repulse style. So imagine it more as a sort of enlarged and enhanced Queen Elizabeth class. The Miyako class. 11,633 tons in standard. Good-looking ships. Okay, the London Treaty says it boils down to. Okay, this is about as complicated as you want in treaties. You've heard my discussions earlier. So, anything exceeding 1,850 tons in standard with guns above 5.1 inch, but less than 10,000 tons with guns below 8 inch as a cruiser. Cruiser divided into two groups. As we work through, we soon realized that the US gets 323,500 tons. The British and Commonwealth gets 339,000 tons, And the Japanese get 208,850 tons. Okay, let's start off with this. If we're going on an IJN getting a 5-3 ratio, which is what they had on everything else, then the British should have got 40. They get 39. And the US gets 37. Okay, let's go on a 7-10 ratio. Well, then that's the British should get, well, let's say roughly 35. Okay. And the US should get 35 to the IJN's 24. So it is neither a 7-10 ratio, it is also not a 5-3 ratio. It is some sort of weird ratio in between, come up by someone who is trying to be smart. Yeah. I don't like it when people try to be smart. I think that's when people are trying to be stupid. Because this is someone trying to eke out the bare minimum cruisers for everyone, which is absurdly going to shoot everyone in the foot. And so, Alex, what were those really buff missile loading guys? Get a couple of those together and just heave in the 14-inch shells out machinery and get your rate advantage that way. Not going to happen. You need a lot of them. You would need a lot of them. So, yeah. Cruisers on the London Treaties are... Oh, caramba. Well, let's put it this way. Yeah. 1910, 15-inch 42 caliber cruisers sounds scary. It does. What's more worrying is when you realise the sort of the level of which they were looking at going, and there's another option as well considered. 10,400 tons standard. Ah, cute. So, for starters, establish the 10-7-7 ratio. Individual cruisers. 8-inch would be the maximum gun, but the category division will remain with ships sorted into either greater or less than 6.1 inch. Limit for ship tonnage remains 10,000 tons because that's the practical one that everyone's agreed to at this point so far, and it works. Everyone's lying, but it works. So using the agreed maximum causes problems because 192,200 tons is weird, and 180,000 tons the mass becomes problematic. So I basically round it up to 200,000. At 10, and Japan would get 140,000 tons for each section, and France and Italy would be allowed 80,000. Watch out for a second, there might be a flying fuffball in here at any moment. There is a frothy research assistant bounding around. There is. And by the way, please keep a look at these books as they are, because the plans are tomorrow that the lovely gazebo I've got goes up, and then I start sorting things out and pushing things out to there, and start clearing up here. Hello. Have you come? Say hello. Up. You've been camera shy for once. Usually you bash me out of the way to get to the camera. Is it because you need a haircut? So why wasn't the 10, 15-inch armed Quintus battleship proceeded with? Because the British felt that any future war would actually need battle cruisers more than battleships. At that point, they had plenty of battleships online. They had plenty of those. They needed battle cruisers because they thought any war would not be a small war in the North Sea, where the battleship would be dominant, but would be a war maneuver which would take place beyond Europe. And any commerce and naval wars such as that, this was going to require battle cruisers. What 92? Tier 12 battleships. Oh god. I don't know what a tier 12 is there, but there are options for them. N3s are definitely an interesting one. Abigail? Oh. What are you up to? Sorry, I have a fluffy research assistant who comes in and goes out, comes in and goes out. There you go. Make sure I have some treats ready for him. Oh, what are you doing? How about you? Alright, yeah. The whole idea is basically to give people enough ability to build ships. And remember, you can retain overage cruisers on these treaty systems. So the Cs and Ds can maintain the numbers. So Britain would like X number of cruisers. Now, theoretically, you could build 20 10,000-ton heavy cruisers, and Britain could work out, well, what kind of light cruiser can we build? Do we want to build something that's 5,000 tons, 8,000 tons, 6,000 tons? What do we want to build, peg this at? And what will get us enough ships? My theory was they probably aim for an 8,000-ton ship, which is where the Super Leanders came in. And the idea would be you could build 25 of those. So you'd have 25 modern light cruisers, 20 heavy cruisers in service, and you'd have however many older cruisers in service to make up your number of fleets. So you'd have 45 modern cruisers, which is where the Super Leander comes in, because the Super Leander is basically an 8,000-ton Leander. And as the ships become old and out of age, that's when they disappear off the numbers because they're over age. And you get to build Surreys and the Surrey Pluses, which is cute. Wookie wonders, if the RM wanted battlecruisers, why did they push to speed up all their battleships? Because you needed to speed up all your ships. Honestly, the British would like to speed up their battleships, mainly because they'd like a faster battle line. And that's because it allows you to speed. Remember, crossing the T is considered the ultimate act of victory in a artillery duel battle style engagement like you had at Jutland and various other scenarios. So being able to go fast in your opponent allows you to cross the enemy's T to decide and pick it. So that's what you're aiming for. Strub, good evening. I just asked, so if you covered the story, but which treaty had more naval officer input and what had more State Department industry input? The State Department and various ministries would argue that the naval officers had input in all the treaties, but arguably the Washington Treaty has the most naval personnel input, and as they go on, they get less and less. Overage cruisers, a useful role for modernized US Pennsylvania and Tennessee class armored cruisers, to an extent. Yep, they're now in the destroyer section. Britain gets US gets total 150,000 tons. British Commonwealth 150,000 tons. Japan gets 150,000 tons. And you get all this weird maths on it, and it's 37, 37, 26. Again, okay, let's do a 5-3 ratio. Well, that's not 5-3, but it's also not 10-7, is it? Hello. Hello, you. What's up? Okay. Oh, you're not escaping that easy. You okay? You're looking a bit weird. Being a bit skitty. Come on. Go chase squirrels. You enjoy it far too much when it's raining. So yeah, and I don't want to get into this. This is the stat I often go is look at what you can build in terms of new destroyers. 12.97 technically destroyer leaders, unless you use some of your tonnage from your light cruiser category. For Japan, 9.12 ships, and destroyers 84 and 58. That's just not really that good, is it? And that's the problem, really. Haida here is 1,990 tons in standard. She's supposed to be 1,850, but she's not. Nothing which is actually proper war build is. So, I decided to go for a treaty which is honest. Again, this is one of the things that puts it in when I'm sort of designing Equitable Treaty, and one of the facts you put in a treaty which people are able to live with so they don't have to lie. Because if people have to lie in order to get something that's viable, or to do what they need to do, then once they start lying over the small things, they're going to find lying over the big things far easier, which is going to undermine and break down the treaty far more quickly. So if you set things up so that people can be honest, they will be honest. A treaty is adhered to by people wishing to adhere to it. And that's the trouble with international law. International law is is mainly what we call as things which are agreements between sovereign states. Who enforces the law on sovereign states? Well, basically, it's other sovereign states either refusing to trade with you or going to war with you. If you're a sovereign state, that's the basic thing. It's a case of we can go, well, there's this international court which can do a judgment on you. Fine, they can do a judgment. But who's going to enforce you pay it? Well, you sign up to a treaty, which means you have to pay it. But who's going to hold you to that treaty? It's got to be other states that got to hold you to that treaty. So international law is law by consensus of sovereign states, which is one of the reasons why it's so hard to get things done, and one of the reasons why so little of it is actually written down and codified. But as a rule, we find international law stands longer and survives better if it's in nations' interest if it stands. So, if it's in their national security interest for this treaty to stand because it serves their national security by making them more secure, they will maintain it. They will follow its rules. They will be far more subscribed to maintaining its rules. So therefore, if you do a treaty which actually, this is how these treaties could reduce the likelihood of war. By actually making it so that actually maintaining these treaties are a better option for you and safer security-wise than actually the risk of war. So, 1,600 tons, limited to 5.1-inch guns or below. Fine. 60% of the total tonnage allocated to units. That seems fine. Okay. 2,000 tons is there, otherwise as above. Right. So, if we start with 200,000 tons, well, 16% of 200,000 tons is 32,000 tons, which is, curiously enough for 16 destroyer leaders. Oh, good lord, look at how the maths works out. Isn't that amazing? Anyone would think someone sensible had thought this up. Japan at 7 would get 140,000 tons, and France and Italy would be allowed 80,000 tons. This would allow the US and UK 16 destroyer leaders and a choice of either 105 1,600 ton ships or 112 1,500 ton ships, equating to a force of either 13 with 8 destroyers and 1 leader in each, and 1 destroyer and 3 leaders remaining, or 14 with 2 leaders remaining flotillas. For Japan, it would be 11 destroyer leaders and 74 1,600-ton ships or 79 1,500-ton ships. That's what. Should there have been measures of enforcement in the treaty? How do you build in measures of enforcement? What do you do? If you don't follow this treaty, we will all declare war. Well, that's great. Instead of becoming a treaty for peace, it becomes a treaty for war, doesn't it? Goes completely against what they want it to be. Take care, McDavid. Because if you did have an equitable treaty, what would be the point? There was no way the second tier powers would be able to economically keep up, and that's a problem because the economic. Here's the thing is, and you're really talking about France and Italy. They don't economically keep up anyway. So in the nicest way, they're signing up to a treaty which is a maximum of what they can build, which they never build to. So that doesn't matter. And you'll never there's no sign of a treaty being created which is designed so that they can keep up, so that therefore the others don't get too far ahead of them. It's just not going to happen. Britain and America aren't going to accept it. Sorry, fluff. Not from the fluff ball though. So, London Treaty. Here is the thing. De facto, sloops are not limited, okay? There is no realistic limitation on sloops. So this is where I start the rant, because in a nicest way, there is no limitation. The only limitation, the reason these ships aren't built, is because of governments deciding not to build them. They are very, very cheap compared to, what you're building at the time. I do have a stat here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where's my cost? Sorry, I'm just tracking down my notes on the costs of the Bitten class because I moved into something else. We are talking about £70,000 for a class for each ship. So that sounds like much to me. Well, no, the Flower class was supposed to be £55,000. So yeah, £70,000 would fit. But yeah, the Bittern class are a good example. They are roughly £70,000 per ship. That's not going to break the bank. You build 20 of those a year, you're 1.4 million. It's just, yeah, it's one of those scenarios where you sit there and go, "Oh my lord, why?" Strub, what's this enough destroyers for all roles? Well, technically, the thing is, when I was putting together the treaties together, 200,000 tons was an equitable amount. Is enough destroyers? Well, yes, you're going to still keep light with cruisers, some overage destroyers. And again, the theory was going through my head. Well, you can build as many sloops as you like, so I'd actually like them to actually build enough sloops. Um, I'm not going to try and avoid the politics debate going on currently in the chat because I don't want to get involved in it because it's a very messy area of international politics and basically debates whether you can have a in nicest way. I'm just going to say this one, okay? The fact is, Northern Ireland is, at the moment, part of the United Kingdom, which means it's internal to the UK. And that you've got issues where technically you've got it under almost dual administration going on, sort of because of some of the agreements, and there are problems with that, in that it was supposed to be done on an honour system, and the British understanding of the honour system was different, I think, from the European understanding of the honour system, and I think that's where the problems were created, because the British idea was that, yes, we will have these laws which will be in place on paper, but in practice it will work out this way, and therefore everything will run on much as it has been before. And it was no, 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 it's changed. And it's a case of that's causing issues and has caused some problems. And I think it's going to become a constant problem on the Brexit debate. So we'll leave that to one side. But I also think if I was America, I would be very cautious about getting involved in it because, as lovely as they might want to be, at the moment they're writing a lot of foreign policy checks that they need Britain to back them up on. And any issues which cause economic problems for Britain will mean Britain will stop backing them up on those international relations. So you have America going, yes, we're going to be really strong on certain things, and then going, well, hang on, it's technically internal and extra, it's also EU and all these issues, and we need the British to do certain things. Because if the British said no, the Americans can't use the bases in the UK for their operations, or even worse, because we can't economically sustain things because they decide to do sanctions, then the Americans would be in a lot of trouble. That's the problem for America. The Americans actually doing sanctions against the UK be a really strong position for them, but let's think it through. What would that immediately do? Oh, you want British ships to cover certain areas? You want a British carrier group to help focus on the Russians in the high north? You want anything? It's not going to happen. Again, this goes back to this treaty you've been talking about. What do you want? In nicest way, what do you as a higher nation want? Some people have kept going up to me going, but how does this solve the issues in China? It doesn't solve the issues in China. At no point would I pretend it would solve the issues in China. But sorry, in the reality of things at the in this time, the British and the Americans don't care that much about issues in China until it serves their purposes. At this point, they want peace with the Japanese, so they can focus on other issues. And that's what this treaty, an equitable treaty, would do. And it's the same when you're dealing with the issues going on in current. There are lots of different levers going on in international relations at the moment, and beware of people deciding they're going to jump on an issue because it's good for domestic political reasons, and they might find themselves with repercussions on the international stage. Remember, the people making this peace treaty, these naval treaties, especially the London ones, believed that they were going to be securing peace. They believed fundamentally they'd be securing peace, and they actually made it more likely there'd be war by turning the screws even harder. So be very careful whenever anyone jumps in and says, "Oh, you should get involved in this or you should do that." International relations are always a minefield. Yeah. Sorry. Ah, that's why I missed you. There's 3 of you. Dead, and where's the other one gone? Yep, you get out that door. See, I thought I was engaging one and going, keep losing track, and turned out I was actually engaging 3. 3 little mosquitoes. All dead. Sad times. Right. Would the ideal class have been quick enough to deploy the original design depth charge in IEC mine with a timer? They could have done that. Boss, if you build enough in enough range, how much of the cruiser role could sloops fill in peacetime? Remember, sloops in peacetime were used as the low-level present ships as force multipliers for cruisers. Especially in a pre-helicopter world, you had the sloops turn up in the smaller harbours. So the cruisers would turn up in larger harbours, and the sloops would visit the smaller harbours. And that's why there's a sloop with Birmingham when she goes in to face off the Japanese at Tsingtao. Sure, if the British did build a number of sloops you suggested in Iran, would Germany be changing its tactics? They'd have to, because they'd probably lose a lot of submarines early on in the war. And for that's a problem, because that's then a qualitative decrease in the number of people they have who are skilled to train up ships. So they'd have a problem. You'd have far better escorted convoys. That's good. I was thinking an outline of trade sanctions could be in the treaty, so the consequence of breaking limitations are known quantity rather than a vague threat. Again, that who are you pointing that gun at? What kind of things are you limiting? What kind of products are you limiting, and etc. And how are you going to focus it? It becomes a very blunt tool and a very angry thing at certain points, because everyone's going to be debating how they should be implemented and what the criteria. And how do you prove? Do you get to weigh a ship? And this is the trouble. There are all sorts of issues with proof, verification of that proof. Basically, you have to case of, are you going to admit that you've done some spying and you know their actual displacements? All gets issues. I am going to get one of those lamps in here at some point which does zap mosquitoes when they fly into it. I think it'd be sensible, because then I could have the windows open later. I like the windows. I might dangle it up there. Or get one which can fix onto the wall. So, submarines. Technically, it's an Equitable treaty, technically, because everyone's linked to limited to the same numbers. However, they're limited to a weird number, which doesn't allow them to build theoretically the same number of large submarines. Everyone's left with a bit left over. So my thing has been upgrading it to 60,000 tons. But on that, left really the same. Doctor, if Germany lost U-boats, do you think Germany would focus on aircraft, cruisers, or E-boats to counter the escort sloops, escorts? That becomes an interesting question, because if those sloops are all armed with with two twin 4-inch guns and 40mm pom poms, they have a fairly good AA fit. Aircraft might well be the advantage they go for, especially if they still get Norway, because that would be an option and would be far more. But again, you could then get escort carriers coming in earlier, or some variation of them, to provide air defense. It basically becomes a very big what if. They might double down on submarines and presume it's lack of numbers, and be working on demanding having more and more numbers. In which case, you might see them actually play the deployment, and there again, the British might also keep building the sloops and keep building and have plenty of them in service. It's one of those things where it turns into the World War II Battle Atlantic is as much a technology battle as it ever is a numbers battle. This would turn it into a technology battle very early on. Right. And of course, we had the same thing confirmed in the London Treaty as had been in the Washington Treaty, that thou shalt not be able to defend thou's own territories, Japan, at all, under any circumstances. Oh, I do not know. All right, then. So would it have worked? Honestly, there's no real crystal ball to tell you whether it would have worked or not. But too, you could likely also use a small number of sloops as heavy gunboats with a small number of 4 to 6 inch guns. It would be three or four. The maximum number of guns allowed is about 4 6 inch. It will be 4 guns, and they're allowed 6 inch guns, yes, or well, under my treaty, 5 inch guns. But again, once you start putting a 6 inch gun on it, it's not going to be fast loading or that really useful. And whilst it sounds good for a gunboat, actually, a twin 4-inch gun looks scarier. And if you go with my proposal, it allows them to have 6. So they could have 6 twin 4-inch guns or 6 twin 5-inch guns. And that's quite a scary system. That's quite a scary mount and quite a capable system. Malt 92. Germany do not have the other long-range aircraft apart from the fragile Condors. Yes, but they would have had to develop. They might well have put money into developing more of them if they had the need of them. That's the thing. This is the point at which I say you can't go any further. I can tell you that the Royal Navy, having increasing anti-submarine warfare escorts from the beginning, would be disastrous for the small number of German submarines at the beginning of the war. And I can tell you that ongoing that would have changed things, but how it would have changed things, I don't know, because it depends on how the German leadership reacts to it, which probably depends on a number of things. Does the British, let's say, if they got more anti-submarine escorts at the beginning of the war, does that mean the Scarpa flow doesn't take place? The Germans don't even tempt it. Or if they do, they come across escorting sloops wandering around. Which, if that's the case, then that's the case, and that probably means that Royal Oak doesn't get sunk, which is useful because she's the only upgraded R class. And if that happens in that scenario, maybe when Courageous is out doing her job, She doesn't get sunk because she might well have some sloops with her as well as destroyers, providing escort for anti-submarine work, which means you'd have a lot more things pinging away, a lot more things hunting submarines. It might mean the submarine doesn't get close to take her. We don't know. And if she's not gone, she might well be operating with Glorious. In which case, if you have two carriers together, they might well have aircraft airborne because there'd be at least one captain who knew what he was doing. And in nicest way, you'd have those set of crews around, which then has an impact on Norway and on Strandhorst and Gneisenau. Maybe they get damaged by an air attack, in which case they might well, when Renown comes pounding out of nowhere, she might well catch them and do enough damage that they either get sunk or they get completely written off out the war. And then you could have what Glorious and Courageous could do in sort of the Mediterranean. If one of them's there for in the Eastern Mediterranean campaign with Eagle, with Illustrious, as said earlier, if you've got three carriers, then Eagle might well be fixed and maintained, so you end up with three carriers at Taranto, in which case you have all the strike, and it ripples on and on and on and on, and we've now gone so distant from history, we are now completely off in, well, fiction land. And it's all from a logical beginning. But a logical beginning I can give you is that the British having more anti-submarine warfare escorts means British anti-submarine warfare capability is that much greater, which means convoys are that much more secure, which raises the bar for submarines successfully interdicting convoys is raised that much higher, which means the Germans will have losses at the beginning of the war, which is going to lead to a change in tactics. What that change will be, I do not know. There are many different options they could pick from, all equally valid. For some reason, my fluff is lying outside the door on the pavement outside rather than in the office, going, "I stretch here." Sharp, Doctor, with your treating sessions, do you think Manning would have been an issue? Not really. Again, not for the British especially, because they'd have been handed over to the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve and Royal Navy Reserve for the sloops. And the numbers, again, are not that much bigger, so they could have found the Manning for it. And you have to remember, this is a navy which goes through the Guides Acts and various other things. So instead of having to recruit more, they'd have to cut a bit less, but not much less, honestly. I do, sure, but the 4 inches less range, and that's generally kind of important for a fire support vessel. Yeah, but the British don't tend to use sloops as gunboats for fire support. They tend to use sloops for other things. If you need a sloop, and again, if they're using the sort of, it's going to sound strange, it will be very much within visual range of the 4-inch guns. 6-inch guns, that the British like to keep those on cruisers. Americans will probably build some with 6-inch guns. That you probably see quite a few of those wandering around in the Philippines, especially the British are building ones with 4-inch guns. That payment was wet, so your fluff is cooling down. I am presuming so. I am presuming he's having a nice rest. That's everyone. I have heard Glorious might have been on a secret mission to mine Swedish harbours. Yeah, I've heard many, many ideas for what Glorious might have been doing. Here's another thing, and don't take this the wrong way, but if you're on a secret mission to do that sort of thing, you're sailing into harm's way, you're going to take more of an escort with you. I guess the whole Northern Ireland mess is better saved for brew ships or bilge pumps. Bilge pumps. Definitely it's a bilge pumps issue. Because it is a bilge pump sort of thing where we sit there and go, right, and here is it all in long form, and it's going to get complicated, and you're possibly going to hate us at points while we're explaining it. But remember, we are filling you in on phases, and sometimes I have to admit, in bilge pumps, we don't even realize we're doing it, but we all sort of play into almost a we each take a corner and argue it. even though it's not necessarily fully our opinion, we are arguing it so you can listen to the debate. There were 6-inch armed RN gunboats for China Station, but those were very much gunboats, not sloops. And that is, again, you can build as many ships as you want, so you don't need to build a sloop for that role. You would build a gunboat for that role. And yeah, dual purpose 4-inch versus the single purpose 6-inch. We won't. The 6-inch sloop gunboats have some really cool names. Right then. Goodness gracious me, it's been 3 hours. I hope you've enjoyed that. What have we got coming up? We have... Hello. Another one down, bites the dust. 18th of June. The action 18th of June 1799. How to lose perfectly good frigates. That's on Saturday. Hope you're going to enjoy that. Yes, that's me going back to the Age of Sail because, well, we haven't done the Age of Sail in a while. I thought it'd be quite fun to do some Age of Sail stuff. And then 19th of June, we have Brew Ships 83, which I can show you the books for. Uh-huh. Out. Ugh. Not in range. These are the books, which will be in Brew Ships 83. They've been sitting up behind me all evening. Oh, now you come in. You wanted to have another biscuit, did you? Okay. I do remember to feed on demand. You're cute. You know, your mummy thinks you come in here just for pats. Yeah. Sure, she doesn't watch the end of my videos, doesn't she? Mm-hmm. That's good. Also, the idea of putting Sweden into the war on the German side makes everything done to stop the Swedish exporting on the island toward Germany somewhat pointless. Yep. Plus, you're already mining the German harbours. Why do you need to mine the Swedish harbours? You're mining one end. Why mine the other? I spy your own book in that pile. Yes, well, it did seem rather appropriate. I too. I once read that the 7.5-inch gun was reasonably compared to the current 8-inch gun. How accurate is that? In 1917, 1918, it's reasonable. By 1930, it's not. Do any of those have ebooks? I think a couple of them have ebooks. That one, that one, that one, that one, that one. That one doesn't. That one doesn't. That one doesn't. That one does. That one does. That one does. That one does. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Consequence, I don't think I'll be able to get that many books anytime soon. You say that now, then you watch the video. Right. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. I hope you enjoyed this evening. I hope you found it useful. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Thank you, founders of UFO. Thank you, Dan Freeman, Calvin Gasberg, Nick Waters, Seneca Nero, Derp Squad, 96831, Calvin Gasberg, Sage. Thank you, Alzaski. Thank you, Melly1640, Jess P. Thank you, DGB40. Thank you. Oh, go all the way back to the beginning. And thank you, Paul from Chicago. Thank you, Stephen Richards. Thank you, Wookie Wonders. Thank you, Duckland95. Darius Rosowski. Juicy Susan. Thank you, Nick Walters. Thank you, Walt92. Thank you, Vision. Thank you, Colin Cameron. Yeah, Walt92. Well, mining Swedish harbours. What about other neutral shooting that's caught up by that? Bad idea. It's a terrible idea. Thank you, Gary Salsky. Thank you, everyone. And hope you enjoyed. Hope you enjoyed as well. Thank you, Bijan. Thank you, everyone. As always, thank you for all your support. Seriously, I couldn't do this all without you. And it would be a lot less fun to do this all without you. And hope you're enjoying what we're doing. One of the things to note is that there will be another Bilge Pumps coming out this week. There'll be 2 Bilge Pumps coming out this week. There was one that came out on Wednesday, which was supposed to come out the previous week, but for some reason got held up by the joys that would be at Apple and Simplecast having a debate. And there is the one which was recorded this week, which was also called episode 91 when we were on the thing, because it was episode 91 was what I thought it was, and then it turned out to be episode 92. Right. Canada went really well. Thank you for those who came and visited. It was really fun meeting you all. And yeah, thank you. And especially, thank you for this. Yes, I'm very, very pleased with my challenge coins. This one, the Battle Atlantic one, really, especially. Dan Freeman, I am slightly more worried by your choice of one with 69 on it for this coin. The fact that you went and hunted through for 69 worries me. But thank you very much for this. It's really, really cool. Thank you. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching. Hope you had a good evening. And thank you, Jack Ray. Yeah, well, basically, thank you, everyone. I'm just checking I've thanked everyone on my list. Alistair Shaw and Alzaski. Desert Foxo. Constant Drowsiness. Did that one? Felix B, thank you. Greg, thanks to Greg. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Yeah, another one dead. Thank you. Meaningful? Really? We're going for 69 being a meaningful number? Humorous, yes. Meaningful. Got my eye on you, Doc. I've got my eye on you.